Act 1, The Ember That Remembers. Chapter 1, The Boy Who Should Not Dream. The morning Ku Academy's second-year calendar turned to October. Issei woke up screaming. It was not the pleasant kind of screaming that accompanied a harmless nightmare. It was the kind that ripped itself from somewhere deep below the lungs, from a place that felt older than memory, older than language. His roommates in the Haida household, his parents, heard it through two walls and a closed door and still sat up straight in their beds. By the time his mother knocked and pushed open his door, Issei was already sitting at the edge of his mattress, both palms pressed flat against his knees, staring at the wall. His breathing was ragged. His brown hair stuck to his forehead. The autumn air was cool, but he was soaked in sweat. Issei. His mother stepped inside, concern pulling at every line of her face. Another bad dream? He opened his mouth. He closed it. Then he said very quietly, I do not think it was a dream. She brought him water and sat beside him for a while, rubbing slow circles on his back the way she had when he was 6 years old and afraid of thunderstorms. He did not tell her what he had seen. He could not have explained it to her. He barely had the words to explain it to himself. Wings. A throne made of something that was not quite light and not quite darkness. A name, spoken in a voice so resonant it seemed to vibrate through bone and time alike. A name he could feel printed on the inside of his ribs but could not bring himself to say aloud. He had dreamed of falling before. This was different. This was remembering. Ku Academy was, by any reasonable measure, a perfectly ordinary school. It had a student council, a disciplinary committee, and a tennis club that took itself far too seriously. It had a beloved rooftop that students were technically forbidden from visiting, and a legendary ramen stall 4 minutes from the front gate that sold out by noon every single day. It had 2 famous buildings known as the Old School Block and the New School Block, and the faculty had been arguing for 3 years about whether the old one should be renovated or demolished. It was also, underneath all of that, the de facto territory of 2 devil factions who had agreed to a non-aggression arrangement, and were currently enrolled as students. Issei knew none of this yet. Issei, on most mornings, was primarily concerned with 3 things: breakfast, the distance between his house and school, and whether the girls in his class would smile at him if he smiled at them first. This morning, he was concerned with none of those things. He walked to school 14 minutes late, which was unusual. He forgot to eat breakfast, which had literally never happened in recorded memory. He sat through his first 2 classes in a state that his homeroom teacher charitably described as distant, and his seatmate Matsuda described, less charitably, as freaky. You look like you saw a ghost, said Motohama, leaning across the aisle during a lull in 3rd period. Or like a ghost saw you. Or like you are a ghost. I am not a ghost, Issei said. Your eyes went red for a second this morning in homeroom. Did you know that? Like bright red. Matsuda saw it too. My eyes did not go red. They absolutely did, man. It was like a video game thing. Very dramatic. Issei turned back to the front of the room and said nothing. But under the desk, he pressed his thumbnail hard into the pad of his finger and thought about wings. About a throne. About a name that felt like it had always belonged to him and had been waiting, patient as a stone at the bottom of a river, for him to be ready to carry it again. He was eating alone on the school roof, which was technically forbidden, and which he was doing anyway because the courtyard felt too loud today, when she found him. Rias Gremory was the kind of person who commanded attention without appearing to try. Her hair was the deep, impossible crimson of autumn leaves right at the moment before they fell, and it moved when she walked in a way that made it seem like it was having its own private conversation with gravity. She was the president of the Occult Research Club, she was one of the most sought-after students in Ku Academy, and she was currently standing 6 feet away from Issei with her arms folded and an expression on her face that he could not quite read. He noticed, with some distant part of his brain, that she looked unsettled. He noticed, with a closer part of his brain, that she was looking at him the way you looked at a door you had been knocking on for years and had suddenly, unexpectedly, opened. Hi to Issei, she said. That is me, he said. Do you mind if I sit? He gestured at the open rooftop with mild bewilderment, since as far as he could tell there was approximately 600 square feet of available space, and she had asked permission to use a small portion of it, which seemed neither very polite or very significant. She sat cross-legged on the concrete, her uniform skirt arranged with the kind of casual precision that suggested long practice, and she looked out at the cool skyline for a long moment before speaking. "How long have you been having the dreams?" she asked. The rooftop went very quiet. "How do you know about the dreams?" Issei asked. "Because I have instruments that measure certain kinds of energy," she said, still looking at the horizon, "and this morning, when you woke up, every single one of them went off at once." He set down his lunchbox very carefully on the concrete beside him. "What kind of energy?" She turned to look at him then, and her blue-green eyes were direct and serious, and also, underneath all of that seriousness, something that looked almost like wonder. "The kind," she said, "that has not been recorded in this world for over 2,000 years. Chapter 2, The Weight of a Forgotten Name. She did not tell him everything that first afternoon. Rias Gremory was many things, but she was not reckless. She had learned patience from her older brother, who had learned it from centuries of governing a devil territory, and she applied it the way a surgeon applied a scalpel, with precision and care and a clear understanding of what was at stake if she was wrong. She told him enough. She told him that the world was not what it appeared, that the three great factions of angels, devils, and fallen angels had been at war for longer than human civilization had existed, and that an agreement called the Peace Treaty of Ko had established this particular city as a shared neutral zone. She told him that the Occult Research Club was, among other things, a cover for her own small devil peerage, which operated under the authority of the House of Gremory. She did not tell him what she suspected about who he was. Not yet. That was a door that needed to be opened slowly, because once it was open, nothing would be the same on either side of it. He listened to all of it without interrupting, which was not at all what she had expected. She had prepared for skepticism. She had prepared for laughter, for the particular kind of dismissiveness that humans deployed against information that threatened their comfortable understanding of reality. Instead, he listened. And when she was done, he said, very quietly, "That explains some things." "Does it?" she asked. "The dreams," he said. "I keep dreaming about a war. I keep dreaming about a moment just before something very large was decided. There is always a throne, and there is always light, too much light, the kind that hurts even in dreams. And there is always a feeling like," he paused, searching for words, "like standing at the edge of something and knowing exactly what the fall will feel like before you fall." She was very still. Her hands, which had been resting loose in her lap, curled slightly. "Issei," she said carefully, "I want to ask you something, and I want you to answer honestly." "Okay. In the dream, when you are standing at the edge of that fall, are you afraid?" He thought about it for a long time. Long enough that a crow landed on the rooftop railing nearby, regarded them both with what seemed like philosophical judgment, and flew away again. "No," he said finally. "That is the part that bothers me most. I am not afraid at all." The Occult Research Club room was in the old school block, which meant it had the kind of character that only came with age, high ceilings, wooden floors that knew how to creak with personality, and windows that let in afternoon light at an angle that turned everything amber and golden. Issei stood in the doorway and tried to take stock of what he was seeing. There was a girl with silver hair and violet eyes seated in a chair by the window, reading what appeared to be a book of summoning arrays. She glanced at him with an expression of cool assessment, and then returned to her reading with the efficiency of someone who had already drawn all necessary conclusions. There was a girl with long black hair and a quiet, composed manner standing beside the bookshelf, who met his eyes and gave him a small, deliberate nod. There was, inexplicably, a small creature perched on the back of the president's chair, which appeared to be a cat and also appeared to be considering him with intelligence that went far beyond ordinary cat intelligence. And there was Rias herself, stepping past him into the room and turning to face him from the center of it, her crimson hair catching the afternoon light and her expression somewhere between careful and expectant. "This is Kaneko Tuju," she said, nodding toward the silver-haired girl. "Akino Himejima." A nod toward the dark-haired girl, who smiled warmly. "And you have, I think, been sensing Kaneko more than you have been sensing anyone else today, have you not?" He opened his mouth to deny it, and then thought about the prickling awareness he had felt walking through the building, the way his attention had kept snagging on corners and doorways as if some part of him was tracking something without being told to. Something like that, he admitted. Kaneko looked up from her book. You have a strong aura for a human who does not know what an aura is. It is disorganized. Like a fire that does not know it is a fire yet. He blinked. That is a very specific way to describe a person. I am a very specific person, she said, and went back to her book. Aquino laughed, a warm, musical sound. She likes you. That is what it sounds like when she likes someone. It sounds like a criticism. With Kaneko, those are the same thing. Rias walked to the large chair at the center of the room and settled into it, not with the casualness of someone sitting down, but with the kind of settled authority that made the chair feel like a throne. Issei thought, I have seen a throne before. He thought it before he could stop himself, and then he stood very still for a moment, because the thought had not felt like imagination. It had felt like memory. Sit down, Issei, Rias said gently. There is more to discuss. We have only begun. She showed him the measuring device. It was a small sphere of crystallized energy, smooth and cool to the touch, that had been sitting on her desk for 6 years and had never in that time registered anything above what she called a background flicker. This morning, at approximately 5:47, it had shattered. The fragments were arranged neatly in a small dish, because Rias was the kind of person who collected evidence. The crystal had not cracked. It had not chipped. It had come apart into precise geometrical shards, as if it had decided, all at once, that it could not contain what it was measuring and had organized its own disintegration accordingly. Sacred gear detectors, Aquino explained, leaning her elbows on the desk with the cheerful ease of someone explaining a weather report, do this sometimes when they encounter a particularly powerful specimen. But those cases are extremely rare. The last recorded instance in this region was she glanced at Rias. Long before either of us was born, Rias said. What was it measuring? Issei asked. You, Rias said simply. Or rather, whatever is inside you. Whatever woke up this morning. He looked at his own hands. They looked like his hands. They had always looked like his hands, a little rough at the knuckles from the years he had spent pretending to be interested in amateur boxing, ordinary brown and ordinary sized, with a small scar on his left thumb from a kitchen accident in middle school. I do not feel any different, he said. I know, she said. It is still sleeping. But something is rising, Issei. Something that I think has been asleep for a very long time, in a very specific place, waiting for exactly the right moment, and exactly the right person. She leaned forward slightly, and her voice was quiet with the particular weight of something that mattered. I believe I know what that something is. But I need more time before I tell you, because if I am right, the information will change everything, and I want to be certain before I do that to you. He held her gaze. She did not look away. There was something between them in that moment, in the amber afternoon light of the old club room, that was not quite comfortable and not quite uncomfortable, that was something newer than either of those things. Okay, he said. I will wait. She seemed to exhale something she had been holding for a while. Thank you. But, he added, I am going to have questions. The corner of her mouth moved. I would be disappointed if you did not. Chapter 3. The seal between then and now. He went home and could not sleep. This was not unusual, technically, since he had already not slept well for the past week. But there was a different quality to his wakefulness tonight, less like insomnia and more like waiting. Like the stillness before a door opened. He lay on his back and stared at his ceiling and thought about everything Rias Gremery had told him, which was already more than he had expected to hear in one Tuesday afternoon. He thought about the shattered crystal, and the way Aquino had described his aura as something disorganized, and the way Kaneko had said it was like a fire that did not know it was a fire. He thought about what Rias had said last, quietly, in the doorway of the club room as he was leaving. She had said, Issei. Whatever comes next. I want you to know that I will be honest with you. About all of it. That is a promise. He had not known why that particular sentence had settled into him so solidly, like a stone dropping into still water, sending rings outward. He had not known why it felt important in a way that most promises did not. He thought about it now and still could not quite name the feeling, only that it was warm, and that it was the first thing since the dream that had felt like something other than unease. The next morning, he arrived at school early, which startled everyone who knew him. He found his way to the Occult Research Club room before class and knocked, feeling somewhat strange about it, and the door opened to reveal Aquino with a tray of tea and an expression of complete, tranquil delight. "You came back," she said, as if this were the best news she had received in some time. "I said I would have questions," he said. "You did. Come in." "Tea? Yes. Thank you." She poured for him with the attentiveness of someone who genuinely enjoyed the ritual of it, and he sat in one of the side chairs and held the warm cup in both hands and tried to organize the questions into something that resembled a rational order. Kaneko was already there, seated in her habitual corner, this time without a book, which felt meaningful in a way he could not articulate. The original Lucifer, he said, because there was no elegant way to ease into it. Rias mentioned the name once, very briefly, when she was talking about the old faction wars. Who was he? The room was quiet for a moment. Aquino set down the teapot with a small, careful sound. The first Lucifer, Aquino said, was not the Lucifer that people usually think of. He was not a ruler in the ordinary sense. He was the one who began everything. The one who asked the question that started the war. What question? Aquino looked at him steadily. Whether free will was worth more than order. He was quiet for a moment. That is, he said, an extremely large question. Yes, she agreed. It was. And the answer, depending on who you asked, was either the greatest act of courage in supernatural history or the worst mistake ever made. She paused. Most historians have concluded it was both. What happened to him? She looked at Kaneko. Kaneko looked at Issei with her unreadable silver eyes. He disappeared, Kaneko said. At the end of the war. There was a theory. Some believed his soul was not destroyed but sealed. Hidden somewhere it could rest and eventually begin again. The warm teacup was suddenly very grounding in his hands. Begin again how? He asked. By being born, Kaneko said simply, as someone who would not know what they were until the seal started to break. He thought about dreams. He thought about a crystal shattering at 5:47 in the morning. When, he said slowly, did Rias first set up that measuring device? Aquino smiled, softly and with great warmth. 6 years ago. When a transfer student from the mainland enrolled in the elementary school across the district. She tilted her head. You were 11, I believe. He set down his teacup. He picked it back up because his hands needed something to do. She has been watching me since I was 11 years old? Watching is perhaps too strong a word, Aquino said gently. She noticed you. The way you notice a candle in a dark room. Not because it is trying to be noticed, but because light does what light does. She paused. She did not interfere. She did not try to accelerate anything. She waited, because she believed that whatever was sleeping inside you deserved the chance to wake on its own terms. He was very still. And then it woke, he said. And then it woke, Aquino agreed. And she came to find you on the rooftop, which she has been debating doing for approximately 6 years. And she sat down next to you, which she has been rehearsing for almost as long. A small, knowing smile. She was nervous. In case you were wondering, she did not seem nervous. Rias never seems nervous. That is a skill she has refined carefully over many years. It does not mean the nervousness is not there. He thought about the way she had arranged herself cross-legged on the rooftop concrete, precise and composed, and thought about what it might look like from the inside of all that composure. Something in his chest did something quiet and complicated. I see, he said. Rias arrived for the club session that afternoon to find him already there, which had not happened before. He was standing by the window, looking out at the courtyard below, and the afternoon light was doing something interesting to him, pulling copper out of his ordinary brown hair, catching on the angles of his face in a way that made Aquino, from her position by the tea tray, hide a small smile. He heard the door and turned, and the quality of his attention was different today. Less uncertain. More like something that had made a decision. I have questions, he said. I remember. She set her bag down and met his eyes. Ask. How certain are you? About what you think I am? She did not hesitate. 70%. Which is higher than I have been about almost anything else in my life. And the number is rising. What would make it 100%? You would have to remember, she said. Not dream. Remember. The way you remember your own name, not the way you reconstruct a story. If that happens, if the seal breaks that far, there will be no question left to answer. And if it does break that far? What happens then? She crossed the room slowly and stood a few feet from him, close enough that he could see the particular shade of her eyes, which were not exactly blue and not exactly green and were, in this light, the color of the sea in autumn. Then, she said quietly, a great many things will become very complicated, and a great many people will have very strong opinions about you, and I will need you to trust me enough to navigate that together. Together, he repeated. I am not asking you to belong to me or to serve my house or to be anything other than what you are, she said, and her voice was careful and genuine. I am asking, if you are willing, to stand beside you while you figure out what that is. Because I think you should not have to do it alone, and because I think, if you give me the chance, I can be useful. He looked at her for a long moment. The crow from yesterday was back on the railing outside the window. He was starting to suspect it was the same crow. Why? He asked. Not tactically. I mean actually. Why do you want to? She was quiet for a breath. 2. The kind of pause that was not empty but full. Because, she said finally, and something in her voice was more honest than anything she had said yet, whatever was sealed inside you chose this world and this life and this exact, ordinary, Tuesday morning school day to start waking up again. And I think that means something. I think that deserves to be honored. A beat. And also because I have been watching a candle in a dark room for 6 years and I would very much like to see what it looks like when it becomes a fire. He was, for once in his admittedly eventful recent life, completely unable to think of anything to say. After a moment, Aquino, from across the room, said cheerfully, Tea, everyone? Yes, said Issei. Please. Yes, said Rias, and the corner of her mouth had that movement again, the one that was almost a smile and somehow more than a smile. Chapter 4, Old Fire, New Morning. The third dream was different. All the others had been impressionistic, fragmented things. Wings. Light. The moment before a fall. The quality of standing at the edge of a decision so large it had no visible boundary. This one had a face in it. He stood in a place that was white in every direction, not the white of rooms or snow, but the white of something before color was invented, and across from him stood a figure that was both very familiar and completely unknown. He could not have described the figure afterward with any precision. It was like trying to describe music. The details slipped sideways every time he reached for them. But the figure looked at him and said, in a voice that was his own voice and also much older than his own voice could ever be, You are almost ready. Ready for what? Issei asked. To remember what you chose to forget, the figure said. And why you chose to be born into someone ordinary. I am ordinary, Issei said. No, said the figure, with what sounded very much like affection. You are someone who decided to begin ordinary, because you understood something very important about what power without wisdom looks like. You had seen it. You had even been it, once. A pause. You wanted to begin again from the beginning, and if I do not want to remember? The figure was quiet for a moment. The white place was very still. Then you will not, it said. That choice also belongs to you. It has always belonged to you. That was the whole point. He woke up at 5:51 in the morning, 13 minutes past his previous record, and lay in the quiet of his room and thought about choice. He found Rias in the clubroom before anyone else arrived, which was becoming a habit between them. She was at her desk with a book open in front of her and a cup of tea steaming at her elbow, and she looked up when he knocked on the open door with the expression of someone who had been half expecting him. Another dream, she said. It was not a question. Different this time, he said. He came in and sat in what was becoming his chair, the one by the window, because no one had explicitly claimed it, and it had good light and a view of the courtyard and the crow's habitual railing. There was a figure. It said I chose this. She set her pen down slowly. Chose what, specifically? To be born ordinary. To start over without remembering. It said I wanted to begin from the beginning because I had seen what power without wisdom looked like. He paused. It implied I had been that, once. Power without wisdom. And that I had wanted to change it. The morning light was quiet and blue, the way October mornings were, and Rias was very still across from him, and the quality of the stillness was different from her usual composed precision. This was something else. Something that lived closer to the surface. Issei, she said carefully. The first Lucifer, in the oldest accounts, the ones that predate the faction wars and the formal histories, in those accounts he is described as someone who broke from the divine order not out of pride, as the later histories claim, but out of a question. Out of the genuine, aching belief that creation deserved to choose its own direction. She looked at him steadily. The war that followed was not what he intended. The chaos that followed was not what he wanted. And when it ended, the histories say he was gone. But the oldest sources, the ones my family has kept for generations, say something different. They say he made one final choice. What choice? To give up everything he was and become something that could be taught wisdom instead of wielding power. To be born without memory. To live a life. To understand, from the inside, what ordinary felt like. Her voice was very quiet. To earn the right to the name again, rather than simply having it by birth. He thought about the figure in the white place. About the voice that was his own voice but older. You were 70% certain, he said. Yes, she said. What are you now? She looked at him for a long, serious moment. 92. He exhaled slowly. The crow had arrived on the railing outside, right on schedule, and was watching both of them with what Issei was becoming increasingly convinced was genuine interest. So I am possibly the reincarnation of the being who started the whole war, he said. Possibly. Who chose to be reborn as an ordinary Japanese high school student. That is one way to frame it. Who has, until 3 days ago, been primarily concerned with breakfast and whether girls would smile at him. A silence. Yes, Rias said, and this time the almost smile was completely, unmistakably, actually a smile. That is, he said, extremely funny. I think it is, she agreed. I also think it makes perfect sense. There is a poetry to it that I find very beautiful, honestly. He looked at her. The blue morning light was warming slowly into gold, and her crimson hair caught it, and held it, and she was smiling at him with something that was warm and real and had nothing of performance in it. He thought, I have been dreaming about a throne for a week. He thought, this is the first thing I have seen that is better than the dreams. He did not say that. He was not ready to say that. But he filed it carefully, in the part of himself that was slowly, inch by inch, waking up. Kaneko arrived at 7:43, assessed the situation with one slow look, and said, You look less like a confused fire today. Thank you, Issei said. I think it is a compliment, she said, hanging up her bag. What do I look like now? She considered this with her usual economy. A fire that is starting to understand that it is a fire, she said. That is better. Fires that know what they are can be careful. Fires that do not know are just accidents. That is actually very wise, he said. Yes, she agreed, without a trace of false modesty, and sat down in her corner. Aquino arrived at 7:55 with enough pastries to feed a small army and the expression of someone who had been delighted about something since approximately 6 in the morning and was waiting for an appropriate moment to share it. Rias, she said, setting the pastries on the desk with ceremonial care, I ran the secondary analysis last night. The resonance pattern is unlike anything in the recorded archive. Not because it is chaotic. She paused for effect. Because it is extraordinarily organized. Rias looked up sharply. Organized how? Like something that was very carefully put to sleep, Aquino said, and is now very carefully waking up. There is intention in it. Structure. It is not a power that is coming apart at the seams. It is a power that is choosing, deliberately, how much of itself to reveal and when. She glanced at Issei with bright, earnest eyes. Whatever is inside you is paying attention. It has been paying attention for a long time. Issei held that thought for a moment. He thought about the figure in the dream, the one that had said you are almost ready with the patience of someone who had been waiting a very long time, and had not minded the wait. He thought about what it meant that the power inside him was not erupting but choosing. He thought, with a clarity that surprised him, that he was not afraid. He was not afraid at all. And somehow standing in a room full of people who had decided, for their own various reasons, to be on his side while he figured out what he was. That felt like exactly the right way to not be afraid. Chapter 5, What the Crow Knows. His name was Drake, and he had been waiting for longer than empires. He did not announce himself with drama or fire. He did not appear in a vision, or a dream, or any of the elaborate theatrical ways that power usually chose to introduce itself. He was simply present one afternoon in the club room, in the space behind Issei's left shoulder where the light was slightly warmer than it had any reason to be, and he said, in a voice that was more vibration than sound, "You should tell her the rest." Issei did not jump. He was, at this point, becoming slowly accustomed to impossible things presenting themselves without warning. He kept his eyes on the book Rias had given him, which was an abbreviated history of the three-faction war told from a neutral scholarly perspective, and said quietly, "Who are you?" "Someone who was sealed with you," said the voice. "Someone who has been sleeping in the same place for the same amount of time, for different reasons." A pause that felt like something long and draconic considering how to be concise. "I am the Welsh dragon. I am what humans call a sacred gear." "Specifically yours?" Issei set down the book. He thought about how to respond to that. "Boost," said the voice, dry with the particular dryness of someone who was very old and found certain things either very funny or very irritating. "Drake. The heavenly dragon of the left hand. You carry me. I carry you. That has been the arrangement, since before the arrangement was intentional." "What does that mean, before it was intentional?" "It means," Drake said, with the patience of a mountain explaining itself to a pebble, "that when a soul of that particular magnitude chooses to be reborn ordinary, certain things come along. Not chosen. Just adjacent. The way a shadow is adjacent to a person. I was there before. I am here now. I will be here when you remember, and possibly when you do not remember, and in any case I am here." "Is this going to be a regular thing? You talking to me?" "Probably," Drake said. "I have opinions. I have been storing them for approximately 2,000 years. Do not expect silence." Issei looked at Rias across the room, where she was reading correspondence with the focused attention she brought to everything. She had not looked up. He could not tell if she could hear this conversation. "Tell her about this?" he said quietly. "She already knows sacred gears exist," Drake said. "She does not know which one you carry, because you did not know, which meant the resonance pattern was sealed behind the same wall as everything else. But the seal is thinning. She will detect it eventually. Better that it comes from you." A pause. "Besides, she will be pleased. She has been carefully not making assumptions, which costs her something. Give her a certainty to work with." He thought about that. He thought about what Aquino had said, about Rias rehearsing how to sit next to him on a rooftop for 6 years. He thought about the kind of patience that looked like composure on the outside. He got up and crossed the room. Rias looked up from her correspondence when he stopped beside her desk, and her expression went from focused to attentive in the way it always did when he was the one speaking to her, as if everything else briefly reorganized itself in importance. "I think I have a sacred gear," he said. She was quiet for exactly one breath. "Tell me," she said, and closed the correspondence without marking her place. He explained what he could, which was limited but specific, and she listened with the quality of attention she had when something mattered, and when he was finished she was quiet for a moment with her eyes on the middle distance. Then she looked at him and said, "The boosted gear. Is that what it is called?" "It is one of the 13 Longinus," she said, and her voice was careful. "The most powerful class of sacred gear in existence. It has the capacity to double the wielder's power in intervals, theoretically without limit, until it exceeds even the strongest supernatural beings." A pause. "It is also deeply connected to Drake, the Red Dragon Emperor, who is one of the 2 heavenly dragons and has been in conflict with his counterpart, Albion, for longer than recorded history." "He told me his name," Issei said. Her eyes came to his sharply. "He spoke to you? He had opinions?" "His words." She stared at him for a moment, and then something happened in her expression that he was learning to look for, the thing underneath the composure. It was not quite joy and not quite relief and was something bigger than both, something that looked like the lifting of a weight. In the recorded history of the boosted gear, she said quietly, Drake has only ever spoken of his own volition to wielders of extraordinary significance. He is not, by any account, a social dragon. She looked at Issei with those Odyssey eyes. The fact that he is talking to you already, before you have even remembered who you are, before the seal has broken more than a fraction, is that a good sign? It is an extraordinary sign, she said, and for a moment the composure was just simply gone, and what was underneath it was something open and earnest and a little bit breathtaking. Issei, I think you need to know that what is happening here is not routine. It is not something that occurs every generation or even every century. What is waking up inside you, if my theory is correct, is something that the entire supernatural world will have feelings about. Very strong feelings. And I want, very much, to be the person who stands beside you when that becomes real. He was standing close to her desk. Close enough that the distance between them was more personal than professional. Why does that matter to you so much? He asked, and his voice was genuine. You have a peerage. A territory. Responsibilities. I am a mess of a situation that is going to make your life very complicated. She looked at him, unhesitating. Because 6 years ago, when I was 12 years old and learning to read energy signatures for the first time, I found a small, impossible light in an ordinary apartment building across the city, and I sat with my equipment and my notes, and tried to understand what I was measuring, and I could not. And that was the first time in my life that something had exceeded my ability to categorize it. A breath. And I thought, whatever that is, it deserves to be understood on its own terms. And then I thought, I want to be the one who understands it. The afternoon light had gone from amber to gold to something that was almost copper, the last hour of October daylight. 92%, he said. Still rising, she said. In the back corner, Kaneko did not look up from her book. But she said, very quietly, to no one in particular, 100% is just honesty with extra steps. Aquino, from the window, made a sound that was the suppressed ancestor of a laugh. Issei, for the first time since the dream that had started all of this, found himself smiling without having to decide to. Chapter 6, Territory and Trust. The first fallen angel showed up on a Thursday. He was standing in the courtyard after school, which was already technically co-academy territory and therefore inside the arrangement. But arrangements meant different things to different people, and fallen angels had their own particular relationship with established boundaries. His name was Danasik, which Issei did not know. What Issei knew was that he had wings the color of old coal and an expression that was partly contemptuous and partly something more complicated, and that he was looking at Issei with focused, deliberate attention from across 30 meters of empty courtyard. Issei stopped walking. Something inside him, the thing that was slowly, carefully waking, registered the other being and went very quiet. Not afraid. Not hostile. Just paying attention. You are the anomaly, the fallen angel said across the distance. Not loudly. Somehow still perfectly audible. I am a second-year student, Issei said. You are, Danasik said something else. He cocked his head in a bird-like way that was deeply at odds with his otherwise imposing bearing. The readings were felt. Not by everyone. But by those of us who pay attention to certain frequencies. He paused. I came to look. Not to act. Consider this a diplomatic reconnaissance. That is a very formal phrase for standing in a school courtyard. I am a formal being. Issei looked at him steadily and felt the quiet thing inside him settle further, like tumblers in a lock considering whether to turn. What did you feel? He asked. Danasik was quiet for a moment that was longer than comfortable. Something old, he said finally. Something that should not be here and yet makes a certain kind of sense being here. Something that makes me. He paused as if the next word was an interesting foreign object, uncertain. That is fair, Issei said. I am also uncertain. It seems to be the condition of the moment. A long pause. You are not what I expected, Danasik said. I am usually not, Issei said. The fallen angel looked at him for another moment, then turned and walked away with the unhurried deliberateness of something that had decided, for now, that there was nothing here requiring immediate action. Issei watched him go, and the thing inside him watched too, and when he was gone it settled back into its patient quiet like a deep-sea creature sinking back toward the floor. Behind him, from a shadow by the building that had not previously contained anyone, Kaneko said, "That was handled well." He startled less than he would have a week ago, which he noted as a data point. "Were you watching the whole time?" Rias asked me to. She stepped into the light with her hands in her pockets, her silver hair very bright in the late afternoon. "She is tracking his faction's attention to this area. She did not want you to be alone for the first contact. She knew he would come?" she suspected. The energy event was loud enough to reach several parties. A pause. "You did well. You did not escalate. You did not try to appear powerful. You were just honest. I genuinely was uncertain." "That is why it worked," Kaneko said. "Uncertainty that is real is harder to argue with than confidence that is performed." He thought about that. "Kaneko," he said, "are you always this perceptive or is this a special occasion?" "Always," she said without hesitation. "I just usually do not see the point of explaining my perceptions to people who have not earned the context yet." "Have I earned it?" she considered. "You are working on it." He decided, with some conviction, that this was the best answer he had received from anyone all week. Rias was waiting in the club room, standing at the window in the way she did when she was thinking, and she turned when he came in with the immediately attentive expression that was, he was learning, simply how she looked at him. "Kaneko messaged me," she said. "You were good. He called me an anomaly." "You are." She said it matter-of-factly, without apology or drama. "He will report to his superiors. There will be more attention from that quarter. I need you to understand that this is going to continue, that various parties are going to take an interest in you, and that interest will not always be as measured as tonight's." "I know. I want you to stay close to this building," she said. "I want you to let me know if you feel anything shifting, inside or outside. I want," she paused, "to be able to reach you quickly if something happens." He looked at her. She was, underneath the practicality, concerned. Not about territory or politics. About him. "Okay," he said. "Okay," she repeated softer, as if the agreement had resolved something that had been sitting at tension. "Rias." Her name felt natural in his mouth now in a way it had not a week ago. "Why are you worried?" "Specifically?" "Not strategically." "What are you actually worried about?" She looked at him for a moment. Then she sat down, which she did not usually do without her desk between them, just in one of the regular chairs, and folded her hands in her lap. "That someone will try to take something from you before you know what you have," she said quietly. "That you will be defined by others before you have the chance to define yourself. That whatever is waking up inside you will be weaponized or politicized or turned into a symbol before it gets to simply be what it is." A pause. "And that you will not be ready, and I will not be close enough, and I will not be able to stop it." He sat down across from her. "I appreciate that," he said. "More than I know how to say, actually. You do not need to say it a particular way. I know. I just wanted to say it." He met her eyes directly, which was something he had noticed he was doing more of, meeting her eyes without it being a challenge or a performance. "I am going to be careful. And I am going to tell you when things change. And I trust you." "Is that useful?" She was quiet for a moment. "Yes," she said, and her voice was very quiet. "That is the most useful thing you have said all week." Chapter 7. The Language of Waking. The seal broke a little more on a Saturday. He was helping his mother carry groceries in from the car, an ordinary act that he had performed approximately 400 times in his life, and he was listening to the specific squeak that the third step on their porch made, and it was the most ordinary morning imaginable, and then it was not. It was not pain. He wanted to be clear about that afterward, when he had the opportunity to be clear about things. It was not pain. It was more like a door opening inside him, a door that had always been there but had been locked, and the lock was old and stiff and required a significant amount of force to turn, and when it turned it echoed. He sat down on the porch step with the grocery bag still in his hands and held very still. What came through the door was not memory in the conventional sense. It was not scenes or voices or the kind of narrative that could be written down. It was more like a quality. The quality of having been. The quality of having chosen. The quality of something enormous and complicated, and very old having loved something enough to become small for its sake. He sat there for perhaps 4 minutes. His mother came back out and looked at him with concern. Issei? I am okay, he said. I just need a minute. You went very pale. I know. I am okay. I promise. She looked at him for a long moment, this woman who had raised him without knowing what she was raising, and her love for him was entirely ordinary and entirely real, and it was, he thought, one of the most important things that had ever happened to him. He thought, I chose this. I chose ordinary love on purpose. I knew exactly what I was doing. He texted Rias before he had quite decided to. The message said, something happened, not an emergency, would like to talk. The reply came in 11 seconds, come to the club room. I will be there. He biked across the city on a Saturday morning with the October air cold on his face, and something vast and quiet settled in his chest, and he locked his bike outside the old school block and let himself in with the key she had given him 2 days ago, and climbed the stairs to the room that had become, in the space of a single week, the most significant room in his life. She was there. She had coffee, which she had made in the small kitchen off the main room, and she handed him a cup when he came in with the kind of practical care that meant she had been thinking about what he might need. He sat down and wrapped his hands around the warm cup and told her what had happened. She listened. She did not interrupt. She did not reach for her instruments or her notes. She just listened, with the quality of attention she had when the thing being said was the most important thing in the room. When he was done, she said, a quality, not a memory. The experience of having been, not the contents of what was. Yes. Like. The shape of something rather than the thing itself. That is consistent with how a seal of that complexity would begin to dissolve, she said slowly. Not all at once. Not in narrative sequence. The qualities first. The feelings. The fundamental truths beneath the story. The story comes later, when the foundation is strong enough to hold it. He chose this, Issei said. I mean, I chose this. Whichever way that works. He paused on the strangeness of the pronoun. I chose to be ordinary because I understood something about what power without the experience of being ordinary looks like. I wanted to know what it felt like from the inside. And? She asked gently. What does it feel like? He thought about his mother's concern on the porch. About the squeak in the third step. About 400 grocery runs and 14-minute walks to school and Matsuda and Motohama and the ramen stall and all the small and non-monumental textures of a life that had been, up until last Monday, perfectly and intentionally ordinary. It feels, he said slowly, like it was exactly what was needed. Like it worked. Like I am a different thing than I was because of it. She was quiet for a moment. I think, she said, that is the most important thing you could have discovered. Why? Because it means the choice was worth it. And it means you understand, in a way that could not be taught from outside, what it is to be human. To love ordinary things. To be afraid of ordinary losses. She held his gaze. Whatever you become, going forward, that understanding does not leave. You carry it the way you carry every experience you have ever had. It becomes part of what you are. He thought about that. Then he said, a little helplessly, I am still going to worry about the ramen stall selling out before I get there. She stared at him for a moment. Then she laughed. It was a real laugh, surprised out of her, warm and genuine and not at all the controlled thing he had expected from someone so composed. It changed her face entirely. Yes, she said, still slightly breathless with it. I think that is probably permanent. It is a very good ramen stall, he said, with dignity. I believe you, she said. Perhaps next time you will take me, and I can verify this personally. He looked at her. She was smiling, open and warm, and the October morning light was in her hair, and she looked like the simplest and most complicated thing in the world. Yes, he said. I would like that. The word settled between them like something that had been waiting for permission. Outside, the crow on the railing appeared to nod once, with great satisfaction, and then flew away into the October morning. Chapter 8. The Name Beneath the Name. The news spread the way news in supernatural circles always spread, through channels invisible to humans, in the particular frequency of beings that pay attention to power. That there was something in Ko. Something that the instruments said was old. Something that Donasek's faction had felt on a frequency they did not have a category for. The House of Gremory heard it from 3 separate sources within 48 hours of the event, which was fast even by devil standards. Surzek's Lucifer, whose instincts for anything connected to his territory were exceptionally well developed, flagged the report personally. He read it twice. He read the secondary analysis that Seraphal Leviathan sent him with the heading "Very Interesting" underlined 3 times. He read Falbium Asmodeus's brief annotation which read, in its entirety, "Pay attention to this one." He sat back in his chair and thought about his younger sister, who had been quietly tracking an energy signature across the city for 6 years without telling him, which was very characteristic of her. He thought about what the oldest records said about the first Lucifer, the ones that his title carried the name of but whose history the current Satans treated with careful reverence. He thought about what it would mean if those records were not legend. He sent his sister a message. It said, "I am coming for a visit. Please do not argue." Her reply came within the minute. It said, "I am not arguing. I expected this. There is tea." He smiled. He had a very good sister. He arrived on a Wednesday, which was the least dramatic option available since Tuesday seemed like it was already fully occupied and Thursday felt too late. Issei met him in the club room. This was, by any measure, an unusual thing for Issei to do, since Surzek's Lucifer was one of the 4 original super devils and the ruler of the underworld's largest territory, and Issei was a second-year high school student who had been aware of the supernatural world for approximately 9 days. But Rias had said, "My brother is coming. He wants to meet you. He is not alarming." Well, he is sometimes alarming, but not to people he has decided to like, and I believe he has decided to like you. And Issei had said, "How does he know enough about me to decide to like me?" And Rias had said, with a careful expression, "He is very perceptive, and some of what he is perceptive about involves things I have perhaps been thinking out loud more than I intended." He had decided not to pull on that particular thread. Surzek's Lucifer was, in person, not what Issei had expected from a description that included ruler and underworld. He was tall and red-haired in a way that marked his family connection to Rias immediately, and he had the kind of easy, comfortable bearing of someone who had been powerful for so long that the power had stopped being something he performed and had become simply part of how he occupied space. He looked at Issei and his expression was complicated. "Hello," he said. "Hello," Issei said. "I am Surzek." "I know," Rias explained. "And you are Issei." "I am also aware of that." Something in Surzek's expression moved. "You are not nervous." "I am moderately nervous," Issei said honestly. "But I am trying to address things directly and then deal with the nervousness afterward. It seems more efficient." Surzek looked at his sister with an expression that said, very clearly, "I see what you mean." Rias, from her chair, had her hands folded and her expression neutral in the way it was when she was trying very hard to appear to have no opinion about something she had a strong opinion about. Surzek sat down across from Issei and leaned forward with his elbows on his knees and looked at him with the direct, serious attention of someone who was taking the measure of something important. "I want to be honest with you," he said. "That is a family trait. We prefer honesty, even when it is complicated. So." He paused. "I have read every report about you. I have looked at every piece of analysis my sister and her peerage have produced. And I will tell you what I believe, and then you can tell me what you think." "Okay," Issei said. "I believe," Surzek said carefully, "that you are the continuation of the first soul that bore the title I currently carry. I believe that soul chose to do something that had never been done before, which is to give up everything it was and start again from nothing, so that the wisdom the power lacked could be built from the ground up." He held Issei's eyes. "I believe that is the most extraordinary act of humility I have ever encountered in 2,000 years of supernatural history." The club room was very quiet. "It is also," Surzek continued, "the reason I carry my title with care. Because the one who held it first understood, in the end, that power and wisdom need each other. And chose to demonstrate that by becoming wisdom first, before anything else." Issei was quiet for a moment. He thought about the quality he had felt on the porch, the shape of a choice rather than the memory of one. He did not think he was doing something extraordinary, Issei said slowly. When he chose it. He just thought it was the honest answer to a very large question. Sirzex studied him. And how do you know that? I do not know it the way you know something you remember, Issei said. But it feels true. The same way your own name feels true. Not like information. Like something that was already there. A silence that was different from an empty silence. 98%, Rias said from her chair, very quietly. 100, Sirzex said, without looking away from Issei. There is no percentage left to argue over. Issei breathed in, slowly. Breathe out. He thought about Drake, patient in his left hand. He thought about Rias rehearsing how to sit on a rooftop. He thought about his mother and the grocery bags and the ordinary love that had been the first thing the waking power had recognized as worth waking for. Okay, he said. Sirzex blinked. Okay? I mean, Issei said okay. I believe it too. I am not going to panic about it. There is clearly a lot left to understand and remember and work through, and I am sure everything is about to become very complicated. But... He paused. Okay. Sirzex looked at him for a long moment. Then he smiled, and the smile was warm and genuine and slightly odd, and he said, I think I understand exactly what my sister means. Issei looked at Rias. Rias, for once, was not managing her expression. She was just looking at him, open and warm and something that was maybe more than both of those things. She held his gaze for a moment. Then she looked away and said, Aquino? Tea, please. The good kind. Already on it, Aquino said from the direction of the kitchen, with the bright cheerfulness of someone who had been listening to every word. Chapter 9, Accord. The ramen stall was called Hamasaki's, and it did, as advertised, sell out by noon. But if you arrived at 11:15 on a Saturday, which Issei had calculated was the optimal window, you could get a table and 2 bowls of the tonkatsu broth that had inspired more student poetry than any other single culinary experience in the 3-kilometer radius of Ko Academy. Rias arrived at 11:12, which was 3 minutes early, which told him things about how she felt about being late that aligned with everything else he had come to understand about her. She was wearing something other than her school uniform, which seemed like it should have been obvious but struck him as specifically notable. A dark coat over a burgundy sweater, her crimson hair loose, and she looked like someone who had carefully not tried too hard and had achieved the exact result trying too hard would have achieved anyway. He stood up. This also felt specifically notable. You are early, he said. You are earlier, she said. I had to secure the table. Obviously. She sat down across from him and looked at the laminated menu with the focused consideration of someone who was going to make an informed choice. What is good? Everything, he said. But the tonkatsu is why people arrive at 11:15 specifically. Then tonkatsu, she said, and set down the menu. He ordered. The stall owner, a compact man named Hamasaki-san who had been feeding academy students for 11 years and had developed a reliable instinct for significant moments, looked between the two of them with the quiet satisfaction of someone who recognized the thing for what it was. 2 tonkatsu, he said. Good choice. The bowls arrived steaming and perfect, and they ate for a few minutes in a quiet that was not uncomfortable, the particular quiet of 2 people who had passed the threshold where silence required filling. Sirzex sent a formal inquiry to the Angel faction, Rias said over her broth. He wants to establish a preemptive communication regarding your existence, before the information spreads further through unofficial channels. Is that a good idea? It is better than the alternative, which is them finding out in an uncontrolled way and responding to the version of the information that gets distorted through rumor. She looked at him. How do you feel about that? I feel like I should probably not have opinions about inter-faction diplomacy yet, he said. I have been aware of the factions for 11 days. Your opinion is relevant, Issei. Whatever is being communicated is about you. He thought about it. Tell them the truth. Whatever you tell them the honest version. That someone chose to start over. That whatever comes next, it is not going to look like what came before. She was watching him with that particular quality of attention. That is, she said quietly, exactly what Sirzex said to say. Those words, almost precisely. Then he and I agree. Yes. A pause. You do that a lot, actually. Agree with him. despite having known him for one afternoon. He finds it gratifying in a way he is trying to be dignified about. He seems like someone who has been saying the right things for a very long time and occasionally encounters someone who says them back. He is exactly that, she said, something fond moving through her voice. They ate in silence for a moment. The stall was filling up around them, the 11:15 crowd arriving with the reliable hunger of people who knew what they were doing. Rias, he said. Yes. When the seal breaks all the way, when I actually remember, what are you afraid of? She was quiet for a moment, her spoon still in her bowl. That you will become someone I do not recognize, she said finally. That what you remember will be larger than what you are now, and the person who ate ramen with me on a Saturday morning will be, somehow, less significant. That is not how it works, he said. What I feel. When the door opens. It does not replace things. It adds to them. The ordinary stuff does not go away. It just has more context. She looked at him. Also, he added, I am specifically the reincarnation of someone who chose to experience ordinary things because he understood their value. I think that particular soul is categorically incapable of dismissing ramen. She stared at him for a moment. Then she smiled, full and genuine, and it did the same thing to her face it always did, changed it completely, opened it, made it something brilliant. That is, she said, both the most absurd and the most reassuring argument I have ever encountered. I have my moments. You do, she agreed. And her voice was warm in a way that settled into him like sunlight. They finished their ramen. The stall sold out at 12:04. They walked back toward the school in the clear October air, not quite side by side but close enough that the distance was a choice rather than an accident. At the gate, she stopped and turned to him. I want to tell you something, she said. It is not strategic or tactical. It is just something that is true. Okay. Whatever comes next, and I know something significant will come next, I am glad it is you. She held his gaze steadily, because she did not look away from things. I am glad it is someone who worries about a ramen stall and talks to a dragon like he is a slightly opinionated roommate, and sat on a forbidden rooftop, and answered my questions honestly even when they were very strange questions. A pause. I am glad that whatever the universe decided to do next, it decided to do it as you. He held her gaze. The October wind moved between them, carrying the smell of autumn leaves and cooling broth. Thank you, he said. For saying that. I mean it. I know you do, he said. That is why I am saying thank you. She nodded once, composed again but differently composed the way a person was after saying something important, and having it received well. Same time Monday, she said. There are things to plan and you have a lot to learn. But... A half pause. I am glad we had today first. So am I, he said. He watched her walk through the gate and across the courtyard toward the old school block, and Drake said, very quietly in the left-hand warmth, she is good, partner. Yes, Issei said, to the October air, to the settling thing inside him. Yes. She is. Act 2, The World That Watched. Chapter 10, The Angel Who Asked First. The angel came on a morning when the sky could not decide between rain and restraint, and so had chosen a thin, silver overcast that turned everything pale and honest. Her name was Ireina Shidu, and she arrived at the front gate of Ko Academy at 7:43 with a travel bag over one shoulder, and the particular expression of someone who has been sent on a mission they personally volunteered for before being officially assigned to it. Issei had known Ireina when they were children. They had gone to the same elementary school for 2 years before her family moved abroad following her father's work, and he remembered her as a loud, bright-eyed girl who had once challenged the entire playground to a sword-fighting contest using fallen branches and had won. He did not, at first, connect that memory to the young woman standing at the gate. Then she turned and saw him and said, with the exact same energy as the branch sword girl, Issei. I cannot believe it is actually you. He stopped walking. Ireina, he said, you remembered. You are extremely difficult to forget. She beamed at him with the uncomplicated brightness of someone who had made peace with being memorable, and then her expression shifted into something more serious, and also slightly odd. Also, I was briefed. About everything. Well. She glanced around the gate area. About the main thing. Which is very large. Can we talk somewhere? The club room, he said automatically. Of course you already have a club room, she said. Some things do not change. Rias met them at the door with the composed expression she wore when she had been expecting a development, and had opinions about it but had decided to begin with courtesy. Shida Ireina, she said. Church-affiliated exorcist. Current rank of Holy Sword user. I received advance notice from Heaven's diplomatic office yesterday. And I am sure you had feelings about that, Ireina said, with the candid directness of someone who had spent years operating in supernatural circles and had learned that acknowledging tension was more efficient than navigating around it. I had thoughts, Rias said. Feelings is a strong word. Thoughts and feelings both. Some of both, Rias allowed, which was more honesty than Issei had expected, and which made Ireina's expression soften into something warmer. I am not here to take him anywhere, Ireina said, sitting down with her bag settled at her feet. I am here because Michael specifically wanted a familiar face present when the formal communication was delivered. He thought it would be better received that way. What formal communication? Issei asked. Ireina reached into her bag and produced an envelope that was sealed with light. Not wax impressed with a sigil. Actual light, the color of early morning, held in place by something that was not quite physical. Heaven acknowledges, she said, the emergence of the energy event in Ko and its identification as the continuation of the original soul. Michael asks only one thing. Which is? Rias said. A conversation, Ireina said simply. Not a negotiation. Not a demand. A conversation. He wants to hear, from Issei directly, what the intention is going forward. The club room was quiet for a moment. What do you think? Issei asked Rias. She looked at him with the expression she had when she was genuinely consulting him rather than presenting a concluded assessment. I think Michael is the most reasonable of the faction leaders and the most likely to respond well to honesty. I think if you tell him what you have told Surzex, which is the truth, the outcome will be favorable. A pause. I also think I would like to be present. Obviously, Issei said. She did not quite smile. But the thing beneath the composure moved. Obviously, she agreed. Ireina looked between the two of them with the interested, perceptive expression of someone who had been briefed on facts and was now observing context. I also brought pastries, she said. From a place near the station. I was not sure what the protocol was for visiting a devil peerage's territory as a church operative, but I thought pastries were probably always acceptable. Aquino materialized from the direction of the kitchen. Pastries are always acceptable, she said warmly. Please. Tell me everything. The conversation with Michael happened 3 days later, through a communication medium that Ireina described as essentially a very serious phone call, and that turned out to be a sphere of concentrated holy resonance that projected a presence rather than an image. Michael's presence was calm. That was the first thing Issei noticed. Not the calm of someone performing serenity, but the calm of someone very old who had made his peace with the weight of what he carried and had found a way to carry it with grace. He said, I want to understand, Issei, not to debate or negotiate. Only to understand. What do you remember? Issei thought carefully before answering. Not events, he said. Not names or sequences. Qualities. The shape of choices. The feeling of having wanted something very large and having watched it become something other than intended, and having sat with the weight of that for a long time, and having decided that the answer was not to be more powerful but to be more wise. A pause. And the ordinary life? Michael asked. Has been, Issei said honestly, the most important curriculum I could have taken. Another pause. Longer. Then Michael said, with a quietness that carried something very old in it, I think the choice that began the war was, in the end, not wrong. Only early. Only made before the understanding existed to support it. Issei was still for a moment. That is a generous reading, he said. It is an honest one, Michael said. Wisdom and power belong together. You understood that, and chose the longer road to prove it. I think heaven can respect that. A pause. I think heaven should have respected the question, the first time. That is my own accounting to carry. Issei did not know what to say to that. Rias, at his side, was very still. Thank you, Issei said finally. For saying that honestly. It is the only way worth saying things, Michael said. And the presence settled, warm and steady, and then withdrew. The sphere went dark. Ireina let out a long breath. That went better than the briefing suggested it might. That was because of what he said, Rias said quietly. Her voice had something in it that Issei had not heard before. Something moved. He accepted a responsibility. That is not nothing. No, Issei said. It is not. He thought about qualities rather than memories. He thought about the shape of regret, old and deep and still real after 2,000 years. He thought that perhaps the whole point of the long road was to arrive at a place where that regret could finally be heard. Chapter 11, What Asia Carries. Asia Argento arrived in Ko 2 weeks after Ireina, which Issei later understood was not coincidence but coordination, and she arrived with a small suitcase, a sacred gear that could heal any wound, and the expression of someone who had been told by every authority in her life that the world outside the church was frightening and had decided, quietly and with great courage, to find out for herself. She was gentle in a way that was not weakness. He learned that quickly. She had, Ireina explained carefully, been cast out of the church for the particular heresy of healing a devil with her twilight healing. The church had called it corruption. Asia had called it the only right thing to do when a person needed help. The church had considered both positions and chosen its own. She had been alone for a while after that. Alone in the theological sense, which was the most complete kind of alone there was when the framework that had organized your entire world had dismissed you from it. Issei found her sitting on the school roof, which was becoming a location with significance, and she looked up when he opened the door, and her expression was careful and hopeful in the particular combination that belonged to people who had been let down often enough to be cautious about hope, but had not yet stopped hoping. You are a Seisen, she said. Ireina told me about you. Mostly good things, I hope. She said you were honest and that you did not make things more complicated than they needed to be. A pause. She also said you were very serious about ramen. That is an accurate summary. She smiled. It was a small, tentative smile, but it was a real one. I have never had ramen, she said. I was in a convent for most of my life. That, he said, is something that needs to be fixed very soon. She looked at him with those green eyes, surprised and then something warmer than surprised. It sounds strange, she said, but that is the most welcome thing anyone has said to me in several weeks. Ramen is a universal language, he said, which was not strictly true but felt true in the way that certain things did. She laughed. It was a quiet laugh but entirely genuine, and it changed her face the same way that real laughter always changed a face, making it briefly, transparently itself. He brought her to the club room that afternoon, and Rias met her with the formal courtesy she deployed when making a person feel significant rather than assessed, and Aquino brought tea and gave her the corner of the couch that got the most afternoon light, which Issei had learned was Aquino's version of saying you belong here. Asia's twilight healing presented an interesting question. It works on anyone, Asia explained quietly, her hands folded in her lap. Devil, angel, fallen angel, human. It does not distinguish. I thought that was how healing was supposed to work. It is, Rias said, with the particular quality in her voice that meant she had strong feelings about injustice, and was expressing them precisely. The church's objection was political, not theological. I know that now, Asia said. I did not know it then. I thought I had done something wrong. A pause. I spent a long time thinking I had done something wrong. You healed someone who needed healing, Issei said. That is not wrong. She looked at him. You say that very simply. It is a simple truth, he said. Some things are. Something in her expression shifted, like a window opening. Not all the way. But a little. Ireina said, Asia began carefully, that you are someone who the supernatural world is paying a great deal of attention to. That you are possibly something very significant. She paused. You do not seem like someone who is very significant. Thank you, he said. I worked hard on that. She blinked. Then she smiled again, wider this time, and Kaneko, from her corner, said without looking up, he is growing on you. It happens. It happened to all of us, Aquino agreed warmly. It happened to me in approximately 4 days, Rias said, and then seemed to notice she had said that aloud and redirected her attention to her correspondence with great composure. Asia looked at the club room around her, at the afternoon light and the warm tea and the people who had apparently all decided, by their own separate routes, to be in this particular place. Can I stay? She asked. It was a small question. It contained a very large amount of hope. Yes, Rias said without hesitating. As long as you want. Chapter 12, The Second Seal Break. It happened during a storm. November had arrived with the particular earnestness of a season that intended to make itself known, and on a Thursday evening when rain was striking the old school block windows with the focused intensity of something that had a point to make, the second part of the seal broke. The first break had been a quality. A shape. The feeling of choice. This was different. This was language. Not human language. Not any language he could have written down or spoken aloud with the instruments available to him in this particular body. But language in the way that mathematics was language, the way music was language, the way the structure of things communicated what they were before you had the vocabulary to describe it. He understood, in the space of approximately 4 seconds, what the war had been about. Not the version that history's told. Not the version with heroes and villains and clear lines of right and wrong. The actual version, which was messier and more human than any of the official accounts acknowledged. It had been about a question that could not be answered from the outside. Whether creation, given the ability to choose, would choose well. Whether the capacity for error was worth the capacity for growth. Whether love that was required was love at all. He understood, with the specific clarity of something becoming known rather than learned, that the one who had asked that question had not been wrong, had been early. Had been imperfect in the asking. Had not accounted for the cascade of consequences, the way a stone dropped in still water sent rings far beyond the original point of impact. But had not been wrong. Rias found him sitting on the floor of the club room with his back against the desk and his knees drawn up and his eyes open, which was how he was when something large was happening internally, and he needed the solidity of surfaces. She had come back for a book she had left, which was the story she told herself. The truth was that Drake had communicated something to the ambient energy of the space that her instruments had caught, and she had turned around 3 blocks away and come back at something close to a run, though she was walking now and breathing carefully. She stopped in the doorway. Assessed him. He was physically fine. Something significant had happened. She came in and sat on the floor beside him, which was not something Rias Gremery did as a rule, sitting on floors. But she sat down next to him with her back against the desk alongside his and her shoulder almost touching his shoulder, and she said nothing, because sometimes saying nothing was the correct thing. After a while he said, "I understood something." "Tell me," she said. He told her what he had understood. Not all of it, because language was not adequate to all of it, but the shape of it. The core of it. The answer to why. She listened to all of it, and when he was done she was quiet for a long time with the rain steady on the windows. The histories, she said finally, made him the villain? Because the war needed a cause and a cause needed a face. I know. But what you are describing is not a villain's motivation. No. It is the motivation of someone who loved something too much to accept a safe version of it. He turned to look at her. She was looking straight ahead at the rain-dark window, her profile clear and serious, and there was something in her expression that he had learned to read over the past weeks, the thing that was genuine underneath the composure. "Yes," he said. "That is exactly what it was." She turned to look at him then, and they were close, closer than usual because of the floor and the desk and the storm outside making the room feel smaller and more significant. "Issei," she said quietly. "Are you all right?" "Yes," he said. "It is a lot." "But yes. It is always a lot," she said. "You say that like you have experience." "I have been preparing for this moment for 6 years," she said. "I have an entire room at home that is just research about you, which is something I have only recently stopped being embarrassed about." He stared at her. "An entire room. It is a small room. An entire room." "The research was extensive," she said, with dignity. He started laughing. Not the polite kind of laughing that was a social signal, but the real kind that started somewhere in the chest and arrived without asking permission. He laughed until his eyes watered, and Rias, beside him on the floor of the club room in the storm-dark evening, was trying very hard not to and failing. They sat there together for a few minutes, on the floor, in the quiet after laughing, with the rain on the windows and the evening settling around them. "An entire room," he said, one more time. Stop, she said, and was smiling, genuinely and completely. Chapter 13. Riser and the Color of Arrogance. The name Riser Phoenix arrived in the club room on a Monday morning the way bad weather arrived, announced first by a change in the quality of the air. Rias read the letter standing up, which she did when the contents required the dignified bracing that came with not having a chair available to suggest any weakness in the posture. She read it through once. Then she set it flat on the desk and stood very still for a moment. What is it? Issei asked. She looked up. Her expression was the one she had when she was being precise about something that required precision. My family has been reminded of a betrothal arrangement made when I was young. The Phoenix family is calling it in. The club room was quiet. Betrothal, Issei said. Arranged marriage, she said. Between myself and Riser Phoenix. Third son of the Phoenix household. A pure-blooded devil. Heir to a regenerative sacred gear that makes him effectively unkillable in a raiding game. A pause. He is also, by all accounts, someone who treats the world as an arrangement designed for his own convenience. Do you want to marry him? Issei asked. No, she said. Simply and completely. Okay, he said. Then what do we do about it? She looked at him, and something shifted in her expression. He had noticed, over the weeks, that she was often slightly startled when he moved directly to solutions rather than dwelling in the problem. He suspected she had expected more preamble. The only formal mechanism available to me, she said, is to challenge the arrangement through a raiding game. If I can field a peerage that defeats his in official combat, the arrangement is void by underworld law. Then we do that. Issei. She paused. He has a full peerage of 14. I have a peerage of 3, plus you, plus Ireina and Asia who are not technically mine. He has been competing in raiding games for decades. He regenerates from any wound. He has never competed against me, Issei said. A silence. He felt drag warm in his left hand, patient and certain. He felt the thing inside him that was waking settle into a particular quality of focus that was not aggression and not fear. It was simply the quality of something that had made a decision. You cannot be in a raiding game, Rias said carefully. You are not officially part of my peerage. Then make me part of your peerage. Another silence. Different in texture from the first. Issei, she said, and her voice was careful in a way that meant she was choosing words with precision. Joining a devil's peerage is a significant commitment. It is not reversible. It is a bond that carries weight and obligation. I would not ask that of you. You are not asking, he said. I am offering. She looked at him for a long time. The October light through the window was November light now, colder and more serious. Why? She asked. Because, he said, 6 weeks ago you sat on a rooftop next to someone you had been watching for 6 years and you told him honestly what you suspected he was. And you promised him you would stand beside him while he figured it out. And now something is trying to take something from you, and you just told me, very clearly and honestly, that you do not want it. He held her gaze. That seems like a situation where I should stand beside you. The way you said you would stand beside me. The room was very quiet. Aquino, from the window, looked at her teacup with the expression of someone trying very hard to be elsewhere while remaining present. Kaneko, from her corner, was absolutely still. Rias looked at him with those out-of-sea eyes, and the composure was simply not there right now, and what was underneath it was something honest and overwhelmed and trying to be dignified about both. You understand what this means, she said. What it would commit you to. I understand that you are the person who has been the most honest with me since this all began, he said. I understand that I trust you. I understand that joining your peerage does not diminish either of those things. A pause. I also understand that Riser Phoenix sounds like someone who treats people as furniture, and that is something I find specifically objectionable. A pause. Kaneko made a sound that might, in another life, have become a laugh. He does, Rias said quietly, treat people as furniture. Then, Issei said, let us demonstrate that furniture has opinions. Chapter 14. The Pawn's Crown. The reincarnation ritual was performed in the club room on a Thursday evening, because Thursday evenings had become, apparently, significant in the ongoing story of Issei's life. Rias had explained the mechanics with her usual precision. A devil's peerage system was derived from chess, which was itself a mortal game that had been adapted from an older underworld tradition of organizing supernatural hierarchies. Each piece carried a different value and a different function. Pawns were the most numerous and the most flexible. Pawns that demonstrated exceptional power or growth could, under the right circumstances, promote. She had also explained, with careful honesty, what she had learned about his energy signature over the weeks, that the dormant power inside him was organized rather than chaotic, choosing rather than erupting, and that the conventional calculation for how many pawn pieces a reincarnation would require was therefore extremely difficult to estimate. All 8, Drake had said that morning, in the quiet warmth of his left hand. She will need all 8 pieces for you, partner. The system will recognize what you are. He had told Rias this. She had been quiet for a long time. 8 pawn pieces, she had said finally, is the entire pawn allocation for a peerage. Using all 8 on a single person means no one else can be reincarnated as a pawn under my household. Is that a problem? No, she had said, with a certainty that brooked no further discussion. It is not a problem at all. The ritual was quiet and focused and carried the quality of something that mattered. She stood across from him with the 8 crimson pieces arranged in her palm, and her expression was the most unguarded he had seen it, no composure and no precision and no management, just Rias, looking at him with the full weight of 6 years of patient attention. Last chance to reconsider, she said. I am not reconsidering. I know, she said. I just wanted to give you the option. Rias. He held her gaze. I made my decision. Stop offering me exits. Something in her exhaled. She placed the first piece against his chest, and the second, and the third, and by the 4th Drake was awake and attentive in the warmth of his hand, and by the 6th the room's ambient energy had shifted in a way that made even Aquino catch her breath slightly, and by the 8th there was a sound, barely perceptible, like a very old key turning in a very old lock. The pieces dissolved into him one by one, and the energy in the room settled, and Rias stood across from him with her hand now empty and her eyes bright. Issei Hayadu, she said formally, because the ceremony required the formal address. You are now a member of the House of Gremory. A pawn of my peerage. Under my protection and standing beside me. Under your protection, he agreed, and standing beside you. Aquino made a small, happy sound from across the room. Kaneko said, promotion is going to be interesting. He felt the connection settle into place, not heavy but present, like a new room in a house that had always had the space for it. He felt the 8 pieces distributed through his energy like the roots of something that had been planted correctly, and intended to grow. He felt Drake, in the warmth, say simply, good. Rias was still looking at him. Her expression was still the unguarded one. Thank you, she said. Quietly. Just for him. We are not done, he said. This is the beginning of solving the problem. Not the solution. I know. A small movement at the corner of her mouth. But thank you? For the beginning. Chapter 15. Training and the Shape of Power. Riser gave them 3 weeks before the rating game, which was generous by the standards of someone who clearly expected to win effortlessly, and was performing patience as a way of condescending to the effort. He is giving us time, Rias said, on the first morning of what became training, because he wants us to understand the gap between what we have and what he has. He thinks the preparation will make the defeat more meaningful. He is about to learn something about gaps, Drake said, in the warm interior of Issei's left hand. He said something, Issei told Rias. I know. I felt the resonance. She looked at him. What did he say? He implied that Riser is about to have an educational experience. The dragon, Kaneko said from across the training ground, which was the large clearing behind the old school block that Rias had apparently been using for years and had never formally acknowledged as a training ground, has correct instincts. High praise from Kaneko, Aquino noted. It is accurate praise, Kaneko said. I do not give inaccurate praise. Training was something Issei had expected to be straightforward and discovered was considerably more complicated than straightforward. The boosted gear worked, at its foundation, on a doubling principle. His power, whatever level it existed at in a given moment, would double at regular intervals as long as he maintained focus and intent. The theoretical ceiling was effectively non-existent, which was either exciting or terrifying depending on the day. The practical limitation was the human body. You are not fully awakened, Rias explained, during the third day of training, in the clear November air that turned their breath to small clouds. The power that is inside you is genuine and significant, but it is still largely sealed. What you have access to right now is the portion that the boosted gear can work with, which is amplified by the gear but still limited by what is available to amplify. How much is available? More than any human measured sacred gear user in recorded history, she said. But considerably less than what you will eventually have access to when the seal finishes breaking. How do I break it faster? She looked at him steadily. You do not. That is the answer. You do not force it. The seal dissolves at the rate at which you are genuinely ready to hold what it contains. Forcing it would be like trying to hold the ocean in a cup. The cup would simply cease to be a cup. So I train with what I have. You train with what you have, she confirmed. And you trust that what you have is enough for what needs to be done right now. Because, she held his eyes, I believe it is. He held her gaze. Then he raised his left hand, and the boosted gear began its low, deep pulse, and the crimson of it matched, in some way he had not expected and could not quite articulate, the precise color of her hair. Asia healed every bruise and strained muscle with a patient thoroughness that made training considerably more sustainable than it would otherwise have been. You push hard, she observed one evening, after a session that had involved Issei learning the specific experience of being repelled by Kaniko's reinforced strength repeatedly, which was educational in the way that most physically educational things were. Kaniko does not pull her punches, he said. She is teaching you, Asia said. There is a difference between a punch meant to hurt and a punch meant to demonstrate where your guard is. This is a comforting thing to say while fixing my ribs. Your ribs are not actually broken, she said serenely. They are very strongly bruised. The distinction matters. He watched her work, her twilight healing gentle and steady, warm green light that had been dismissed by the church as corruption and was in his experience the most uncomplicatedly good thing he had encountered in the supernatural world. Asia, he said. Yes? You are very good at this. She looked up from his side with a surprised expression, as if the compliment had arrived from a direction she had not anticipated. It is the only thing I have always known how to do, she said. Heal people. I used to think that made me simple. That someone who could only do one thing was not very significant. One thing done with that much care, he said, is more significant than 10 things done carelessly. She stared at him for a moment. You say that very simply, she said again. It was becoming the thing she said when he surprised her. I believe it very simply, he said. She returned to the healing, and her hands were very steady, and after a moment she said, quietly and to the air rather than to him directly, I am glad I came here. So am I, he said. Chapter 16. Ireina and the Sword in the Middle. Ireina should have had, technically, no standing to be training with the Devil Peerage. She was a church exorcist, affiliated with Heaven's operational branch, carrying a holy sword replica that had been constructed from the original Excalibur fragments. She was, by any formal metric, on the opposite side of the supernatural arrangement from Rias Gremory and her household. She was also, by 9 in the morning on a Wednesday, sparring with Kaniko in the clearing while Aquino called observations and Issei kept score and Rias watched from the sideline with the expression of someone who had decided, quietly and firmly, that the formal metric was less important than the practical reality. You favor your right side, Kaniko said, blocking a sword form with her bare forearm in a way that should not have worked, and did because Kaniko's reinforcement was genuinely extraordinary. I know, Ireina said, resetting. It is a habit from early training. Habits from early training are the most persistent, Kaniko said. You have to know about them before you can account for them. Is that advice or a warning? Both, Kaniko said. They are often the same thing. At lunch, Ireina sat beside Issei on the low wall by the old school block with a rice ball in one hand and a look on her face that he recognized from childhood as her working something out expression. Can I ask you something directly? She said. Yes. When Michael talked to you. The conversation through the sphere. What did it feel like from your side? I was there but I could only hear the words. Not the quality of it. He thought about it. Like talking to someone who had been carrying something for a very long time and had decided it was time to set it down, he said. Not dramatically. Just quietly. Like a decision that had already been made, and the conversation was the acknowledgement. She was quiet for a moment. He has been, she said, since the war, trying to hold everything together. Angels, humans, the new factions, the peace. He is very good at holding things together. But it costs something, holding things for that long. Yes, Issei said. I think he needed someone to tell him the question at the beginning was not wrong. Only the timing. Only the execution. And you could tell him that because you were the one who asked it, in a sense. She ate her rice ball for a moment, thinking. Issei, she said. When we were kids. You were the boy who stood up for the cat that the other boys were throwing rocks at. Do you remember that? He blinked. I remember the cat. I did not remember you saw that. I was on the other side of the fence, she said. You did not see me. You just walked over and stood in front of the cat and looked at the other boys and said, very calmly, that this was not acceptable. She looked at him with something warm in her expression. You did not fight them. You did not shout. You just stood there and they stopped. Because you were serious and you meant it, and somehow they knew you meant it. That is a very small thing. It was not a small thing to the cat, she said. And I do not think it is a coincidence that the soul choosing to be reborn as someone ordinary became specifically that particular boy. She paused. I think the soul knew what it was doing when it chose you. He was quiet for a moment. He thought about what the dream figure had said. About beginning ordinary on purpose. About wanting to learn wisdom from the inside. Thank you, he said. For telling me that. I have been holding it since the briefing, she said. It felt important to say directly. He nodded. Across the clearing, Kaneko was apparently now teaching Ireina's left side habit with the patient exactitude of someone who took technique seriously. You are going to be very useful in 3 weeks, he said. Ireina straightened with the brightness of someone given a mission. I know, she said. I intend to be spectacularly useful. I have been planning which sword forms work best against regeneration. Riser regenerates from everything. Everything has a pattern, she said, if you look at it from the right angle. I have been looking. He decided, not for the first time, that Ireina Shido was one of the most underestimated people in any room she walked into. Chapter 17. The night before the game. The raiding game was scheduled for a Saturday. On Friday evening, the club room was quieter than usual. They had trained. They had planned. They had gone through every scenario Rias and Aquino between them could construct, every formation Riser's peerage had used in past games, every possible configuration of the battlefield. They had, in Rias's measured estimation, done everything that could be done in 3 weeks by people working with genuine commitment. Now there was nothing left to do but be present in the evening before. Asia made tea with an unusual focus, measuring everything twice as if precision would anchor the uncertainty. Ireina cleaned her sword replica with the rhythmic, meditative attention of someone who had a ritual and was following it. Kaneko had her book but was not reading it, which was how he could tell she was thinking. Aquino was at the window, watching the November dark, and her expression was the one she had when she was reaching for something she did not often show, something underneath the warmth and the humor. Rias was at her desk. She was not reading correspondence. She was not making notes. She was sitting in her chair with her hands flat on the surface of the desk and her eyes on the middle distance, and the quality of her stillness was the kind that was not empty but very full. Issei crossed the room and sat in the chair across from her. She came back from wherever she had been and looked at him. How are you? He asked. I am preparing, she said. That is what you are doing, he said. How are you? A pause. Nervous, she said. I am nervous. Which I do not usually say. I know. Tomorrow matters, she said, in a way that is personal as well as practical. If we lose, it is not just the arrangement. It is the precedent that what I want is less significant than what was arranged for me. And I have spent my entire life being very careful about not accepting that precedent. You are not going to lose, he said. You cannot know that. No, he agreed. But I believe it. That is different. She looked at him. What do you believe specifically? She asked. Not challenging. Genuinely asking. As if the specifics mattered to the weight of the belief. I believe, he said carefully, that you are the most prepared person in this room for what tomorrow requires. I believe that your peerage fights for you the way people fight when they have chosen to, not when they are required to. I believe that Riser Phoenix has never encountered an opponent with a boosted gear, a healing ability with no faction restriction, a church sword user, and a cat who considers opponent analysis a personal hobby. Kaneko made a small sound. Nikomata, she said. Not a cat. My apologies, Issei said. A Nikomata who considers opponent analysis a personal hobby. Rias's composure cracked, just slightly, into something that was relief shaped like a smile. You are doing the thing where you list practical observations to address a feeling that is not about practicalities. Yes, he said. Is it working? A pause. Somewhat. Then I will continue, he said. I also believe that whatever happens tomorrow, this room, this specific group of people, remains what it is regardless of the outcome. That is also something I believe. She was quiet for a moment. Issei. Her voice was very quiet. Why does it matter to you? Specifically. Not as a general principle. Why does my situation matter to you? He held her gaze. The room was warm and dim, and outside the November dark was absolute. Because you matter to me, he said. Simply. The way simple things were said when they were true. The room was very still. Akino, at the window, had her eyes on the dark and a very small smile. Asia had stopped measuring tea. Kaneko was not looking up, but her ears, which were sometimes more visible than others, were turned toward the desk. Rias looked at him for a long moment. The seal, she said finally, her voice careful and honest, is making you more articulate. No, he said. I was always going to say it. I just did not have the correct moment until now. She breathed in, slowly. Get some sleep tonight, she said. All of you. Tomorrow is a game, and we are winning it. Her voice was steady and certain, and it carried the room with it. Yes, said Akino. Yes, said Asia. Obviously, said Kaneko. Obviously, said Issei. Chapter 18. The Rating Game, First Movement. The battlefield generated by the rating game system was a constructed space that drew from both participants' preferred environments to produce a terrain that was neutral by design and interesting by accident. It looked like a city. Not specifically, but the shape of a city, broad streets and structures and levels that could be used tactically. It felt like November, cold and overcast and honest. Rias's peerage took position with the efficiency of people who had prepared well. Akino, high and centered, her lightning element power giving her the broadest coverage from above. Kaneko, ground level, reading the terrain with the unhurried attention of someone cataloging possibilities. Ireina, flanking right, her holy sword replica bright in the gray light of the constructed space. Asia, protected and central, her healing available to anyone who could reach her. And Issei, at the point, with his left hand raised and drag awake. Rias, as king, positioned where she could see everything and direct what needed directing. Riser's peerage arrived from the opposite end of the field with the organized confidence of 14 people who had won many times before. Riser himself walked at the center with his hands in his pockets and his expression the particular kind of bored that was performed by people who wanted their boredom to be a message. He looked at Issei with mild curiosity. You are the anomaly, he said. I heard about you. People keep saying that, Issei said. They are not wrong. Riser's gaze moved past him to Rias. I want you to understand, Rias, that I bear no personal animosity. This is simply the way things are arranged. Things, Rias said clearly, can be rearranged. Riser smiled. Not by losing. Then we will not lose, she said. The game began. The first phase was exactly what Rias had anticipated, which was Riser sending his peerage in formations while he observed. She had planned for it. What she had not planned for, specifically, was Drake's first boost arriving at triple the usual intensity. It hit Issei like a wave of sound, not painful but enormous, the doubling that should have been one interval arriving as 3, and he understood in that moment what Akino had meant about organized power, because it was not chaotic. It was precise. It was choosing. He raised his left hand. The crimson energy was very bright. Boost, Drake said, with considerable satisfaction. What happened to the first wave of Riser's peerage was not destruction. It was displacement. Clean, controlled, exactly calibrated to remove rather than harm. He had thought about this, talked with Rias about it, understood that the raiding game had rules and that winning required operating within them. The first 4 members of Riser's peerage retired from the field. Across the constructed space, Riser's expression had changed. The boredom was gone. In its place was something more alert. More genuine. Interesting, he said. Quietly. To himself. Issei heard it anyway. The middle phase was harder. Riser came himself, which was what they had expected, and he regenerated from everything, which was also what they had expected, and the combination of those 2 things was exactly as difficult as Rias had described. Ireina was the one who found the pattern. He regenerates from damage, she said, through the communication link Aquino was maintaining. But regeneration has a rhythm. There is a fraction of a second between the damage landing and the regeneration beginning where the wound is real. If you can create overlapping impacts, staggered by that interval, the regeneration cannot keep up. You calculated that, Issei said. I said I had been looking, she said. He looked at Drake. Can you time it? He asked. I have been timing it since he arrived, Drake said. The interval is consistent. It is mechanical. He has never had to account for something that could hit faster than the interval. Until now, Issei said. Until now, Drake agreed. He raised his hand. The boost came in a cascade. Chapter 19. Riser learns something new. Riser Phoenix had never, in his experience of raiding games, encountered a moment where the fight stopped being a performance of his expected victory and became something else. This was that moment. The boy with the crimson sacred gear was hitting faster than regeneration. That was not supposed to be possible. Phoenix regeneration was the fastest in the underworld. No one hit faster than it could close. He found himself doing something he had not done in years, which was paying full attention. The boy was not angry. That was the other thing that surprised him. The ones who fought Riser were usually angry, motivated by either the insult of his confidence, or the frustration of watching regeneration undo their best efforts. This one was focused. Precise. There was something in his bearing that was not arrogance, and not aggression, and was something older than both of those things. And the sacred gear was doing something that Riser's advisors had not mentioned, which was that it was continuing to escalate in a way that had no apparent ceiling. He had felt power before. He had power himself. He was from a family defined by a specific supernatural trait, and had spent decades understanding that trait and its applications. What he was feeling from across this battlefield was not comparable to anything in his reference set. It was old. It was completely organized. It was choosing to be limited to what the current situation required and making it clear, somehow, that the current situation was not even close to its actual capacity. He stopped. Issei stopped. They stood across from each other in the gray light of the constructed field, and Riser said, for the first time in a raiding game, "What are you?" "I am," Issei said, "someone who is standing next to Rias Gremory because she deserves to be stood next to by choice, not by arrangement." Silence. "That is not an answer to my question. It is the only answer that matters for this particular situation," Issei said. Riser stared at him for a long moment. He thought about the Phoenix household, and its arrangements, and the way those arrangements had always felt to him like a comfortable current, something to be borne along by rather than questioned. He thought about Rias Gremory's expression when she had looked at the letter. He had seen that expression from the reporting, from his family's account, and he had told himself it was pride and obstinacy. He looked at the boy across from him, and he thought, with unusual honesty, that it had not been pride. It had been someone saying, very clearly and with full conviction, that she had opinions about her own life. He had not listened. "I concede," Riser said. The field went very still. "What?" said one of his peerage members behind him. "I concede the game," he said. His voice was level. Deciding something while saying it, the way decisions sometimes happened. Rias Gremory wins by concession. He looked at Issei for another moment. "Tell her," he said, "that I will address the arrangement with my family. The Phoenix word is worth something, or it should be." "I will tell her," Issei said. Riser nodded once. Then he turned and walked off the field with his hands back in his pockets, and his bearing was different than it had been when he arrived. Not diminished. Just more genuine. The field dissolved. Rias was waiting when they emerged. She looked at Issei and at the state of the field, and her expression moved through several things very quickly: assessment and calculation, and something that was relief shaped differently than relief usually was shaped. He conceded, Issei said. A pause. Voluntarily? Yes. Why? Because, Issei said, I think he is more capable of honesty than his upbringing suggested, and he chose to demonstrate it. Rias stared at him for a long moment. You are the only person in supernatural history, she said carefully, who would walk out of a raiding game and describe the opponent with generosity. He did the right thing in the end, Issei said. That seems worth acknowledging. She looked at him. The gray light of the game space was fading back to Koa's early winter, and her hair was very bright against the pale sky. Is it done? Asia asked, appearing at his shoulder with her hands clasped and her expression hopeful. It is done, Rias said. The certainty in her voice was something clean and absolute. It is done. Asia made a small, relieved sound that dissolved immediately into a smile. Ireina said, loud enough to carry, I knew the interval pattern would work. I told you. You did, Kaneko said. You were right. Thank you, Kaneko. I only say true things. Chapter 20, The Third Quality. 3 days after the raiding game, the third seal quality arrived. He was at school, in an ordinary class, in an ordinary mid-morning, and it arrived the way the others had, not with drama but with the quality of a door opening. This one was quieter than the second. More settled. Like something that had been deciding whether to arrive and had concluded that the timing was correct. What came through was not understanding of events. Not the shape of choices. It was something simpler and more fundamental than either of those. It was the experience of being loved. Not in the abstract. Not as a concept. The actual memory that was not memory. The quality of having been loved by the creation that had been the point of everything, the ordinary and extraordinary things together, the way a child loved unconditionally, the way friends loved with specificity, the way a person you chose loved you back when you had not expected them to. He sat in his chair in his ordinary classroom and held this very carefully. He understood something new. The question the first Lucifer had asked, the one about free will and order, the one that had started everything. He had understood it before as a philosophical position. Now he understood it differently. It had not been an argument. It had been an expression of love. It had been saying, I believe in this creation enough to want it to be free. I believe in it enough to take the risk. I love it too much to keep it safe in a cage, even a beautiful one. He had been right. And he had been alone in being right, which was the part that had gone wrong, because love that does not communicate is love that cannot be held by the other person, and the war had happened because no one else had understood what the question was actually saying. He sat in his ordinary chair in his ordinary classroom and felt something in him settle so completely that it was almost like relief. He found Rias in the club room after school, alone, reading. She looked up when he came in and read his expression the way she read him, with the attentiveness of someone who had been paying close attention for a long time. Another break, she said. Yes. He sat down across from her. Rias. I want to tell you something that is not about what I remember. It is about right now. She set down her book. Gave him her full attention. The quality that came through today, he said, was about love. About what it felt like to be loved by what you love. And it made me understand something about now, not just about before. Tell me, she said. The reason the question started the war was not because it was wrong, he said. It was because it was not understood. It was love that was not communicated clearly enough to be held by the person it was meant for. He held her gaze. I do not want to make that particular mistake again. In any version of it. She was very still. Issei, she said carefully. I am saying this clearly, he said, because I have learned that clarity matters more than timing. You have been honest with me since the beginning. I want to be honest with you now. A breath. I think what I feel about you is something that has been growing since the first afternoon on the rooftop and has not stopped growing since, and I do not want to not say it because I am waiting for the correct moment, when the correct moment is just whenever the true thing is ready to be said. The club room was very quiet. Outside, the early winter evening was settling over Ko, and the light through the window was the color of something ending and something beginning at the same time. Rias looked at him for a long moment. I have, she said finally, And her voice was the honest one, the one without management or composure or careful selection, been trying to be appropriate. About the fact that you are in my peerage, and you are someone significant, and I have a responsibility not to complicate things with my own feelings. Are they complicated feelings? No, she said. They are very simple feelings. That is what makes being appropriate about them difficult. He felt something in his chest do the thing it had been doing with increasing frequency around her, the quiet, warm thing that was not complicated and not dramatic and was simply present. Then perhaps, he said, we are both done being appropriate. She looked at him. Her eyes were the color of autumn water and completely open. Perhaps, she said, we are. The evening settled around them, and the silence that followed was not empty but entirely full, and neither of them spoke for a while, and neither of them needed to. Chapter 21. What the Fallen Angel Faction Wants. The Fallen Angel Faction's response to the energy readings was considerably less straightforward than Michael's. Kokabil arrived in Ko on a Tuesday, which was poor timing by anyone's measure, since Tuesday was Rias's peerage's designated rest day, which they had established 3 weeks into training and which Kaneko enforced with the serene inflexibility of someone who had done the math on recovery times and was unwilling to compromise the data. He did not come to the school. He came to the edge of Koa's energy boundary, the invisible perimeter that marked the territory's formal limits, and he stood there and radiated the particular quality of a being who was very powerful and very impatient, and wanted both of those things to be immediately apparent. Issei felt him before anyone else did. It was one of the newer things, the sense that had been growing as the seal continued its gradual dissolution, a peripheral awareness of significant supernatural presences in his vicinity. It was not exactly pleasant. It was like standing near a speaker set slightly too loud, not painful but impossible to ignore. He was at home when he felt it, which was where he spent rest day because Kaneko had specifically told him that rest day meant going home and resting and not finding reasons to come to the club room. He texted Rias. Her reply came in 8 seconds. We know. Stay where you are. Please. He stayed where he was. He did not particularly want to, but he stayed. He had learned over the weeks that please from Rias was not a softening of a directive. It was a specific request carrying specific weight. She said please when the thing mattered. He stayed home and read and waited and listened to the quality of the city outside his window change slightly as whatever was happening at the boundary reached a decision. It took an hour and 20 minutes. Then the quality changed back, and he felt the presence withdraw, and his phone buzzed. Rias's message said, he wanted to see you. We told him the correct channel is through Surzex. He chose not to escalate. For now. He replied, for now. She replied, for now. He is looking for something. I need to understand what. He replied, can I come to the club room? A pause of 12 seconds. Then, Kaneko says it is still rest day. He smiled. He replied, tell Kaneko it is research, not training. Another pause. Then, she accepts this distinction. Come. Kaneko's acceptance of the research distinction did not prevent her from giving him a look when he arrived that clearly communicated she had noted the precedent, and reserved the right to apply it at her own discretion in future. He accepted this look as fair. Rias had her research out, the real research, not the formal reports but the older material that she kept in a separate section of the filing system, hand-copied passages from texts that predated the faction wars. Kokabil, she said, when he sat down, is one of the original Grigori, the faction of fallen angels descended from the Watchers. He was one of the most powerful military figures in the war. He did not accept the armistice. Formally, he is bound by it. Personally, he has never accepted that the war ended rather than pausing. What does he want from me? Not from you specifically, she said slowly. I think he wants what you represent. Or rather, she corrected, he wants to understand what you represent, because if the original soul is genuinely waking up, it changes the strategic landscape he has been maintaining in his mind for 2,000 years. Changes it how? She looked at him steadily. Because the question you asked, the original question, was the one that justified the war in his framework. The war was about free will versus order. If you, the one who asked that question, are now returning and the answer you embody is wisdom and peace rather than conflict, then the entire justification for his continued resistance to the armistice dissolves. So I am a problem for his worldview. Yes. Which makes you either very important to him, or very threatening to him. And we do not yet know which. He thought about the quality at the boundary. The impatience. The power. He is afraid, he said. Not quite a statement. Not quite a question. Rias looked at him sharply. What makes you say that? Because the quality of it. It was not hostile. It was pressured. Like something that has organized its entire existence around one framework, and has just encountered information that does not fit. He paused. That is frightening. Not the information itself. The not fitting. She stared at him for a moment. Sirzek said, she said slowly, when he met you, that you had an unusual capacity for accurate empathy. He said it felt like talking to someone who could see further into a situation than the visible evidence suggested. I am just listening to the quality of things, he said. Most people do not listen that way. The seal has been teaching me to, he said. Each break adds something. This one, I think, added listening. She held his gaze for a moment. Then, she said quietly, we are going to need to listen very carefully to what Kokabil is actually asking, underneath what he appears to be asking. And we are going to need to answer it in a way that does not make him more afraid. That is harder than a rating game, he said. Yes, she agreed. It is. But I think it is what this moment requires. He thought about the third quality. About love that needed to be communicated clearly to be held. Okay, he said. Then we do the harder thing. Chapter 22, The Seal at Halflight. November gave way to December in the way seasons did when you were paying attention to other things. Gradually, and then all at once. The city strung lights along its streets. The ramen stall added a winter menu. The old school block acquired a smell that was wood smoke and cold stone and the particular coziness of a building that had survived many winters and expected to survive more. The club room became warmer in the way rooms became warmer when the people in them were comfortable with each other, not from heat but from the particular quality of ease that built between people who had been through something real together. Asia had learned to make 3 different kinds of tea and had opinions about each of them, which was new territory for someone who had spent most of her life being told that opinions required permission. She was discovering that opinions were simply observations about your own experience, and that no one needed to grant you access to your own experience. Ireina visited twice a week and sparred with Kaneko with the regularity of someone who had found something genuinely useful in an unexpected place and intended to continue finding it. She was also, increasingly, simply present, in the way that some people become present in a space, not because they were assigned to it but because they had decided it was theirs. Kaneko continued to read. She also, with increasing frequency, made observations that were either one sentence of crystalline accuracy or absolute silence, and both were equivalently valuable. Aquino made tea enlightening and occasional assessments that were so precisely correct they functioned like small scalpels. And she watched everyone with the warm attention of someone who loved her people and was very good at not making that love inconvenient. Issei stood at the window of the club room on a December evening when the city lights were starting to come on and the sky was the specific dark blue of early winter, and he thought about who he had been in September. A second-year student concerned with breakfast and the distance to school and whether girls would smile back. He was still that. He had not stopped being that. He had the same walk to school and the same enthusiasm about ramen and the same friends who were primarily bewildered by recent developments, but were adapting with the resilience of people who had known him long enough to accept that unusual things occasionally attached themselves to him. He was also something more now. Not instead of more. He could feel the seal, the shape of it, like knowing the outline of something in a room you have not yet turned the light on in. He knew it was there. He knew it was vast. He knew, with the certainty of something that had been confirmed across multiple waking instances, that it was organized and intentional and would continue to dissolve at the rate he could hold what it contained. He was not in a hurry. He had learned, from the ordinary life and from the qualities that had come through the breaking seal, that the right pace was the sustainable one, and that forcing wisdom produced the same result as forcing any other natural process, which was a damaged version of the thing you were trying to produce. He was content to grow at the rate that growing required. Rias found him at the window, which was becoming a location with significance. She had been at her desk doing correspondence, and she had stopped, and she had come to stand beside him, and they looked at the city lights together in a comfortable silence that was the kind built by people who had stopped needing to fill silences. Serzex wants to meet again, she said after a while. After the new year. He wants to discuss what Kokabil's continued attention means for the co-arrangement. Okay. He also wants to introduce you to Seraphal. Officially. She has been asking. Seraphal Leviathan? She annotated his report about you with the word interesting underlined 3 times and a drawing of a star. He looked at Rias. She was trying not to smile. She was not fully succeeding. I am going to assume she is a specific kind of person, he said. She is an extremely specific kind of person, Rias confirmed. You will like her. Eventually. The first impression is a great deal to process. I process well, he said. You do, she agreed. They were quiet again. The city lights multiplied as the evening deepened, and the old school block creaked in the December wind with the contentment of a building that had stood long enough to know itself. Rias, he said. Yes. The seal is going to keep breaking. There is going to be more. More memory, more power, more complications, more factions who have opinions. Yes. I want you to know, he said, that none of that changes what I said in this room 3 weeks ago. About what I feel about you. If anything, what comes through the seal makes it more clear, not less. She was quiet for a moment. Because? She asked. Not doubtfully. Asking because she wanted the specific answer. Because, he said, every quality that has come through is about what matters. What the whole question was actually about. And every single time, what comes through confirms that love and wisdom and ordinary things that are tended with care, those are the answer. Not power. Not hierarchy. Not arrangement. He held her gaze. And you are someone who has always understood that. You understood it before I remembered it. She was very still beside him. The city lights were warm and countless below. I have been thinking, she said, with the carefulness she had when something was true and she wanted to say it accurately, about what it means to stand next to someone. Not behind them. Not in front of them. Next to them. And? I think it means you cannot see the whole picture, she said. Because you are in it. You are part of it. And that is a different thing than observing it. A pause. I have been observing you for 6 years. And now I am in it. And the difference is something I do not have adequate language for yet. But I know it is the right position. He turned to look at her fully. She turned to look at him. They were standing close enough that the winter chill from the window was a shared thing, and the warmth of the room was also a shared thing, and neither of them moved for a moment because the moment was complete. Then she said, very quietly, next year is going to be complicated. Yes, he said. Kokabil. Seraphal. The remaining faction conversations. Whatever the seal breaks into next. Yes. Are you ready? He thought about it honestly. No, he said. But I am the right kind of not ready. The kind that grows. She held his gaze for a moment longer. Then she turned back to the window, and stood beside him looking at the city lights, and the silence was entirely full. Behind them, the club room held its warmth. Akino's tea was cooling on the desk. Kaniko's bookmark was precisely placed. Asia's healing was settled and ready. Irena's sword was clean. Drake was warm in his left hand, quiet with the particular patience of something very old that had found its correct place after a very long time. Outside, December continued, and the seal, deep in the center of everything, turned 1 degree more toward open. Act 3. The Name the World Remembers. Chapter 23. Seraphal Leviathan and the Drawing of a Star. Seraphal Leviathan arrived in Ko on the 3rd of January with the energy of someone who had been looking forward to this particular Tuesday for several weeks and had chosen her outfit accordingly. She was one of the 4 original super devils. She was the current Satan Leviathan, holder of a title that carried the weight of 2,000 years of supernatural governance. She had, according to Rias's careful advance briefing, personally rewritten 3 sections of the Underworld's foundational legal code, maintained one of the most effective intelligence networks in any faction, and was broadly considered by those who had encountered her in formal negotiation to be considerably sharper than her preferred presentation style suggested. Her preferred presentation style was a twin-tailed hairstyle, and an expression of infectious delight that she deployed at the same wattage regardless of whether she was meeting a school tribunal or an interfaction summit. She looked at Issei from across the club room, clasped her hands together, and said, "You are exactly as interesting as the readings suggested and somehow also more interesting than the readings suggested." "How does that work?" "I genuinely do not know," he said. "He says that a lot," Kaneko offered from her corner. "It is accurate a lot," Issei said. Serafal turned to Surzex with the expression of someone delivering a verdict. "I like him." "I know," Surzex said. "I told you. You said he was sensible and honest. You did not say he was funny. I thought you would discover that yourself, and enjoy the discovery more than the briefing. You were correct." She turned back to Issei. "Sit down. Tell me everything. Start from the beginning of the seal breaks, not from the biographical material." "I have read the biographical material. The seal break experience is what I actually want." He sat down, because Serafal Leviathan gave the impression of someone for whom saying no was technically possible but practically unnecessary, and he told her about the seal breaks in order, the quality of each one, what had come through and what he understood as a result. She listened with an attentiveness that was completely at odds with her opening energy, the focused, still attention of someone who processed information at speed and was choosing to do so quietly. When he finished, she was quiet for a moment, then she said, "The third quality? Love as communication. Can I ask something specific about that?" "Yes. When you understood that the original question was an expression of love rather than a philosophical argument, how did that change the weight of the war for you?" "Not intellectually. Emotionally." He thought about it carefully. "It made it sadder," he said finally. "And also more resolvable. Because if it was always about love and the love was never communicated clearly enough to be held, then the resolution is communication. Which is a harder and slower answer than a philosophical one, but it is an answer." Serafal was quiet. Then she said, very quietly, "That is the most useful thing anyone has said about the war in 2,000 years. Surzex, beside her, did not say anything. But his expression was the one he had when something confirmed something he had hoped was true. Rias, across the room, was watching Issei with that particular quality of attention that she had when something about him continued to exceed her already high expectations, and she was trying very hard not to make it visible and not fully succeeding. "Okay," Serafal said, coming back to her previous energy with the decisiveness of someone who had what they needed and was ready to use it. "I am going to set up formal communications with the Grigori. Not Kokabil." Over his head. "Azazel." She looked at Issei. "The leader of the fallen angel faction is not Kokabil. Kokabil is a problem that Azazel has been managing for a long time. Azazel is someone who I think will respond very well to exactly what you just said." "When?" Rias asked. "After the new year settles," Serafal said. "February at the earliest. I want Issei in the room for it. Not as a symbol. As himself." She looked at Issei directly when she said as himself, with an emphasis that communicated she had thought about this carefully and meant every word of the distinction. "All right," he said. "Good." She turned to Rias. "Your peerage is extraordinary, by the way. I read the rating game report. Ireina Shidu identifying the regeneration interval was the kind of analysis that most dedicated strategic minds would not manage under time pressure." "How did she do that?" "She said she had been looking," Issei said. Serafal smiled, and it was the genuine version, warm and precise. The people who are looking are always the most dangerous ones to underestimate. Chapter 24, Aquino and the Thunder She Carries. He found Aquino on the roof of the old school block on a January afternoon when the cold had settled into something serious, and the sky was the white of compressed clouds that had not yet decided to become snow. She was standing at the railing with her hair loose, which was unusual, since she almost always wore it contained, and she was looking at the city with an expression he had not seen on her before. The warmth was still there, but underneath it was something that had its own weight, something she was holding carefully at arm's length. "You did not have to follow me," she said, without turning. "I know," he said. "I wanted to." A pause. "You have good instincts for when people need company, and when they need solitude," she said. "It is a useful trait. Which do you need right now? She was quiet for a moment. I am not certain, she said. I have been trying to work that out. He leaned on the railing beside her and looked at the city, which was what you did when someone needed you to be present without pressure. After a while she said, I want to tell you something. Not because it requires action. Just because I think you should know. Okay. My father was a fallen angel, she said. He fell for love of my mother. That is the standard story, the one in the records. What the records do not include is that when their union was discovered, either faction accepted them. And when my mother was killed, my father left. He simply left. A pause. I was raised by my mother's family, who were not kind about what I represented. I was raised to understand that the power I carried from my father was something to be managed, not expressed. But Rias found you, he said. She did. Yes. A small sound that was related to a laugh. She found me and she told me that what I carried was mine, not my father's, not my mother's family's interpretation of it. Mine. Another pause. She did for me what she is doing for you. She waited until I was ready and then she told me the honest thing. He looked at her profile. The composure she wore was very thin right now, and what was underneath it was not dark but it was complex, the kind of complexity that came from having loved and lost and built something new and still occasionally felt the shape of the original wound. Why are you telling me today? He asked. Because, she said, Seraphal mentioned the Grigori and Azazel yesterday, and Azazel's faction is the one my father belonged to, and I spent last night thinking about whether that matters and how much and what I wanted to do with that thinking. What did you decide? She turned to look at him. Her gold eyes were direct and honest. That it matters, but not in the way I was afraid it might. I am not afraid of the meeting. I am not afraid of the name. I think I needed to say it out loud to someone who would simply hear it rather than respond to it. I hear it, he said. Yes, she said. I know. That is why I said it to you. They stood on the roof in the cold January air, and after a while the weight in her expression settled into something more like peace, the kind that came not from resolution but from the decision to carry something with both hands rather than one. Aquino, he said. Yes. The power you carry. The lightning. The way it feels when you use it. Does it feel like yours? She thought about it. More and more, she said. Since I joined Rias. Since I started choosing when and how, rather than managing and containing. A pause. Yes. It feels like mine. Good, he said simply. She looked at him for a moment. Then she smiled, and it was not the warm, social smile she used like a coat, but the real one, the smaller and more genuine one. You are, she said, very good at this. At what? At making people feel that what they carry is worth carrying. He thought about the third quality. About love as communication. About the difference between holding something alone and having someone stand next to you while you held it. I think, he said, that is something I came here specifically to learn how to do. She looked at him for a moment. Then she turned back to the city, and her hair moved in the January wind, and the weight was still there but it was different now. Shared, rather than held alone. Chapter 25, What Kokabil Actually Wants. He came without announcement on the 14th of January, which was a school day, which was probably intentional. The difference this time was that he came to the school itself, not the boundary, and he came alone, which was either an act of restraint or an act of confidence, and Issei, standing in the courtyard when the quality of the air changed, was not certain which. He did not call Rias. Not because he had decided to handle it alone, but because the quality of the presence was different from last time. The pressure was still there. The impatience. But underneath it, tonight, was something that had moved toward a decision. He waited. Kokabil landed on the opposite side of the courtyard with the particular kind of precision that very powerful beings used when they were choosing not to be dramatic. He had dark wings, 6 of them, folded with the ease of long practice. He was tall and broad-shouldered and his expression was the one that Issei had learned to read from the quality at the boundary, the expression of something that had organized itself around a framework and was standing at the edge of a significant reconsideration. They looked at each other across the empty courtyard. You came to a school, Issei said. I came to you, Kokabil said. The school is incidental. What do you want? I want to know, Kokabil said, and his voice was controlled, but the control was effortful, whether it is true. Not the reports. Not the faction communications. I want to know from you whether what they are saying is real. What are they saying? That the original is waking. That the soul that asked the question is here, now, in this city, in this. A pause that had something almost like disbelief in it. School. Yes, Issei said. It is real. Silence. Then, Kokabil said, and his voice had changed, the control less effortful and something underneath it more exposed. I need to know something else. If the soul that asked the question is here and waking, what is the answer? After 2,000 years. After everything that followed. What is the answer to the question you asked? Issei was very still for a moment. He thought about the qualities. He thought about what the war had been about, and what it had actually been about underneath what it appeared to be about. He thought about love that needed to communicate clearly. The question was right, he said. Free will is worth more than perfect order. The answer to that has not changed. What was wrong was not asking the question. What was wrong was asking it in a way that did not give the people it was for the context to understand that it was for them. Kokabil was very still. The war happened, Issei continued, because a question about love was heard as a rebellion. Because the love in the question was not communicated. And the people who were supposed to be loved by the answer did not know what was being offered, so they defended against it. A long silence. I fought, Kokabil said quietly, because I believed the question deserved an answer, and no one was giving one. I kept fighting because the armistice felt like the question being buried rather than answered. I know, Issei said. How do you know? Because I felt it, Issei said. The shape of it. What you were trying to preserve. A pause. You were trying to make sure the question was not forgotten. Kokabil stared at him. The courtyard was completely silent. The January night was cold and clear. The question has not been forgotten, Issei said. I am here. The fact that I am here is the answer to whether it was forgotten. He held the fallen angel's gaze steadily. You can stop fighting to keep it alive. It is alive. A very long silence. Kokabil looked at him with an expression that Issei had never seen on a being of that power and age. It was not defeat. It was not concession. It was something that lived in the same neighborhood as relief, the specific relief of something that has been held at tension for a very long time, and has just been given permission to rest. Azazel, Kokabil said finally, wants to meet. I told him I would come first. To verify. And, tell him, Kokabil said, that it is verified. He opened his wings, all six, with the unhurried deliberateness of something that had made a decision. And tell him that I will attend the meeting. If there is one. He rose. He did not look back. Issei stood in the empty courtyard and felt Drake, very warm, say, that, partner, was the harder thing. Yes, Issei said, to the January night. You did it well. We will see, he said. We will see. He texted Rias. He said, Kokabil came. He is going to attend the Azazel meeting. No conflict. Call you in 10 minutes. Her reply came in 6 seconds. It was a single word. How? He replied. I told him the truth. A pause of 11 seconds. Then, of course you did. Call me now, not in 10 minutes. He smiled, and called. Chapter 26, The Dragon's History. Drake began talking more in February. It started small. An observation here. A piece of context there. The particular commentary of something that had been storing things for a very long time, and had decided that the appropriate person was now present to share them with. And then one evening, while Issei was doing homework in the empty club room, Drake said, I knew him. The first one. I want you to know that, since you are him and also not him. Issei set down his pencil. Tell me, he said. I was not bound to him the way I am bound to you, Drake said. The boosted gear did not exist in its current form then. The binding came after. But I was adjacent, the way I described before. And I was aware. What was he like? A pause that had the texture of something very old, selecting carefully. Genuinely curious, Drake said. That is the thing the histories do not capture. He was not certain. He was not arrogant about the question. He was asking it because he genuinely did not know the answer and believed that the question deserved to be asked aloud rather than held in private. Another pause. He was also very lonely. The question felt right to him, and no one around him could understand why it felt right. That is its own particular isolation. Issei sat with that for a moment. He chose to be reborn alone too, he said. Without anyone knowing. Yes. Though less alone this time than the last. A warm note in the draconic voice. He planned better, I think. Or the universe did. Arrange for someone to be paying attention. Issei thought about Rias at 12 years old with her instruments, and her notes, and her careful, patient attention aimed at an apartment building across the city. Yes, he said. Someone was paying attention. Do you want to know what the war was like from the outside? Drake asked. From the position of something that was watching but not fighting? Yes. Then I will tell you. Not tonight. It is a long telling. But I will tell you, and you can decide what to do with it. Whether it is something the peerage should hear, or Surzex, or the meeting with Azazel. Why do you want to tell it? Because, Drake said, with the quiet certainty of something that had been waiting for the correct moment for 2,000 years, it is a true account. And true accounts deserve to be heard by someone who will know what to do with them. A pause. You are the first person in my experience, as a bound sacred gear who I believe qualifies. That is a very specific compliment. I only give accurate compliments, Drake said. Kaneko would understand. He laughed. He had not expected to laugh during a conversation about the original war of the three factions, and yet. All right, he said. Tell me. We have time. We do, Drake said. That is one of the better things about beginning again. And he began. The telling took 3 evenings. By the second, Issei had begun sharing pieces of it with the club room, since Rias had arrived to find him mid-conversation with his own left hand and had asked, with absolute composure, whether she was interrupting, and he had said no. Sit down, you should hear this. By the third, all of them were there. Rias and Aquino and Kaneko and Asia and Ireina, and Drake's voice was audible only to Issei, but Issei related carefully. And the room was quiet with the quality of people receiving something significant. What Drake described was not a war of heroes and villains. It was a war of misunderstandings so large they had generated their own momentum. Of factions so invested in their own frameworks that new information could not find a way in. Of individuals on every side who had wanted peace and had not had the language or the structural support to choose it. And at the center of all of it, a single being who had asked a single question and spent the entire duration of the conflict trying to be understood, and never quite succeeding. The tragedy, Drake said, on the third evening, was not the war. War's end. The tragedy was the misunderstanding. That is what lasted. Rias was quiet for a long time after that. Then she said, the meeting with Azazel? This is what we bring to it. Not a position. Not a negotiation. This. A true account, Issei said. Yes, she said. And looked at him with the certainty of someone who knew exactly what they were doing. A true account is the only thing that actually resolves a misunderstanding. Chapter 27, Meeting Azazel. The meeting happened on a Saturday in late February, in a location that was neutral by formal agreement and interesting by nature, a conference space in Ko that had been temporarily bounded by cooperative energy from all three factions, which produced the peculiar sensation of standing in a room that was simultaneously in the underworld, heaven, and the human world, and had the good sense to be simply quiet about all three. Azazel was not what Issei had constructed in his imagination from the descriptions. He was sharpied and carried himself with the particular ease of someone who had survived a very long time by being smarter than the situation required and had found this approach consistently entertaining. He had 12 black wings, currently folded, and the expression of someone who had been waiting for this specific meeting for longer than he intended to admit, and was not going to be the first person to say so. He looked at Issei for a long moment when they were introduced. Then he said, "You are younger than I expected." "I started over," Issei said. "Deliberately. From the beginning." "I know." A pause. "I read every report. Twice. Then I read the older material. The primary sources from before the war." He tilted his head. I wanted to understand the original context before I made any assumptions about the current one. That is a careful approach, Issei said. I have been less than careful before, Azazel said. The results were not good. I prefer careful now. There was something direct and honest in that admission that Issei had not expected, and he adjusted his calibration accordingly. Kokabil told me, Azazel continued, what you said to him in the courtyard. About the question being alive. About the reason the war happened being communication, not the question itself. He paused. I want to ask you to say it again. In your own words. Not because I distrust Kokabil's account. Because I want to hear it directly. Issei said it again. He said it as clearly as he had said it to Kokabil, without adjustment for the audience. Because the thing Rias had taught him and that the seal had confirmed was that clear honesty was more persuasive than polished rhetoric. Azazel listened. When Issei finished, he was quiet for a full minute. Then he said, I owe you something. Or rather, I owe the soul an accounting. Because the Grigori's involvement in the war was not ideologically clean on our side either. We fought on the wrong side of several questions, and the reasons were not always good ones. I am not here to assign fault, Issei said. I know, Azazel said. That is why it is important for me to assign it myself. A silence that had the quality of 2,000 years sitting in a room together, and deciding what to do with themselves. What are you proposing? Sirzex asked, from his position at the table. He had been quiet, which was how he was in rooms where the conversation needed to find its own shape before it could be directed. A formal acknowledgement, Azazel said. From the Grigori to the three factions, that the armistice is not a pause. That it is real. That we commit to the peace not because we are required to but because the reason for the war has been addressed. He looked at Issei. By the one who had the most standing to address it. Serafal, from the other side of the table, made a small satisfied sound. Michael, present through the same communication sphere that Issei had spoken with before, was quiet for a moment. Then he said, Heaven accepts this proposal. And reciprocates the acknowledgement. Issei looked at the table. At the people around it. At the fact that a conversation between a second-year high school student and a being who had spent 2,000 years in impatient resistance had produced, in a single courtyard on a January night, the momentum for this room. He thought about ordinary things being chosen on purpose. He thought about the third quality. About love as communication. He thought it worked. The long road worked. Thank you, he said to the room. Do not thank us, Azazel said, with the particular directness that was becoming his characteristic register in these conversations. You did the thing that was hardest. The rest of us are just responding to it correctly. Chapter 28, The Fourth Break. It came 3 days after the Azazel meeting, at 7 in the morning, while he was making tea in the kitchen of the Haida household and listening to his father read the newspaper aloud to himself in the next room, which was a habit his father had maintained for as long as Issei could remember, and which he found deeply comforting in its consistency. The fourth quality was different from all the others. The first had been the shape of choice. The second had been language. Understanding. The third had been love as communication. This one was memory. Not all of it. Not the complete unfolding of 2,000 years of supernatural history experienced from the inside. But a specific memory, precise and detailed in a way the qualities had not been. A single moment, held intact through however many years and seals and chosen forgettings. It was the moment of the decision to become someone new. He saw it the way you saw a dream you were inside. From behind his own eyes but also from outside them, simultaneously participant and witness. He stood in a place that was the end of the war. He could not see the place clearly but he could feel it. The exhaustion of something that had fought for a long time without winning and had finally understood that winning was not the question. That the question had always been different. And he felt himself, the original self, make the decision, not dramatically. Not with ceremony. With the quiet, complete certainty of someone who had understood something true and was following it to its natural conclusion. He would give up the name, and the power, and the memory. He would begin again without any of it. He would be ordinary, completely ordinary, and he would learn from the inside what the ordinary life felt like, what it cost and what it gave, what wisdom looked like when it was built from the ground rather than inherited from the top. And he would trust that the qualities, the real ones, the ones that were true rather than constructed, would find him again when the time was right. He had not been afraid. He had been, and this was the part that hit him most squarely, genuinely hopeful. He sat down on the kitchen floor. His father stopped reading in the next room. Issei? I am all right, Issei said. I just need a minute. A pause. Your tea is going to be cold. I know. I will make a new pot. Thank you, Dad. He sat on the kitchen floor with his back against the cabinet, and held the memory carefully. The way you held something that was both old and new at the same time. Something that belonged to you entirely but that you were meeting properly for the first time. He thought, I was hopeful. He thought, after all of that, after the war and the misunderstanding and the 2,000 years, the decision was made with hope, not despair. He thought, I did not give up. I started over. The distinction felt like the most important thing he had understood so far. His father came into the kitchen with the new pot of tea and looked at him on the floor with the expression that parents had when their children were doing something they did not understand and had decided to approach with gentle practicality rather than interrogation. He poured 2 cups. He set one on the floor next to Issei and sat in his chair at the kitchen table with his own cup and his newspaper, and he did not ask any questions. After a while, Issei picked up the cup and drank the tea, which was warm and exactly right, and thought that his father was one of the best people he had ever known in any life, and that the ordinary love of ordinary people was one of the most extraordinary things in any world. Chapter 29, Rias and the Full Account. He told her that evening. All of it. Not in fragments or qualities but in as complete an account as he could construct, because the memory was precise enough now to be communicated rather than described. She listened the way she always listened when it mattered, with everything. When he finished, she was quiet for a long time with her hands folded on the desk and her eyes on the middle distance, and the March evening settling blue outside the windows. He was hopeful, she said finally. Yes. Not resigned. Not defeated. Hopeful. Yes. She was quiet again. He let it be quiet. Issei, she said eventually. What does it feel like? Having that memory? Not what the memory contains. What it feels like to have it. He thought about it with the care it deserved. Like understanding a word in a language you have been speaking phonetically for a long time, he said. Everything makes sense the same way it always did. But now it also makes sense in the original language. There is more dimension to it. Does it change how you feel about now? It confirms it, he said. The things I was choosing, the relationships I was building, the reasons I wanted to be in this room, in this peerage, with these people. He held her gaze. It confirms that all of that was not an accident of circumstance. It was what I came here to find. What the entire long road was designed to produce. She held his gaze. Me, she said? Not a question. Honest. Among other things, he said. Yes. The evening light through the window was the particular blue of March moving towards spring, and the club room was warm and quiet around them. I want to say something, Rias said. And I want to say it precisely because precision is important to me and imprecise versions of true things are worse than silence. All right. I have been careful, she said, since you said what you said in December, to not move faster than the situation warranted. You were still learning what you were. The seal was still breaking. The faction conversations were happening. I did not want the personal thing to be complicated by all of the rest. I know. But the 4th break changes the context, she said. You have a memory now. A complete one. And you have said it confirms rather than changes. Which means the personal thing is not a complication. It is part of the foundation. Yes, he said. So I want to say, precisely, I love you. Not because you are the original Lucifer or because the seal is breaking or because it is the correct strategic conclusion. Because you are the person who sat on a rooftop and answered my strange questions honestly and has been honest with me every single day since. Because you make this room better by being in it, and you make me think more clearly by being someone I want to be clear for. She held his gaze with the steady certainty that was her most characteristic quality. That is what I want to say precisely. He was quiet for a moment. The room was entirely still. Rias, he said. Yes. I love you too. He said it with the same simplicity he had always used for true things. For the same reasons, and also because you kept an entire room of research about someone you had never met for 6 years because you believed they deserved to be understood on their own terms. That is the most extraordinary act of respect I have ever encountered in any version of my existence. She stared at him for a moment. Then she laughed, quiet and genuine, the real laugh. I told you it was a small room, she said. It was an entire room, he said. Stop, she said, still smiling. I am not stopping. Issei. It was an entire room dedicated to a person you had never spoken to. That is remarkable. I am going to continue finding it remarkable. Then I suppose, she said, with the composure that was warm now rather than managed, I will simply have to accept being found remarkable. Yes, he said. You will. Outside, the March evening continued, and inside the old school block the club room held its warmth, and they stayed there together in it for a long time, in the comfortable silence of two people who had said the true things and did not need to fill what came after. Chapter 30. What Asia Learns About Wings. Asia had never seen anyone transform before. Not in the way that the supernatural world used transformation, the external expression of what a being fundamentally was. She saw it for the first time on a Tuesday in March, during what had become a regular training session. Issei was working on the boosted gear's escalation patterns, understanding the intervals, learning how to direct the doubled power with precision rather than simply releasing it. And at the third interval, something different happened. Wings appeared. Not large, not fully formed, not the complete expression of whatever they eventually would be. But they were there. At his shoulders. Deep crimson, the color of the boosted gear, and edged at the tips with something that was not quite light and not quite darkness, but some third thing that did not have a color name in any human language. They lasted approximately 4 seconds. Then the interval ended, and they dissolved back into the energy of the gear, and Issei stood in the clearing looking at the space behind his own shoulders with an expression of mild bewilderment. Asia had her hands over her mouth. Did I, he said slowly, just have wings? Yes, Kaneko said from the edge of the clearing, with the tone of someone recording data. They were beautiful, Asia said. Her voice was very quiet. She said it the way she said things that were true before she had decided whether to say them out loud, which meant they were the most genuine version of the truth. He turned to look at her. She was still looking at the space where the wings had been, and her expression was the open, wondering one that she had when something reminded her that the world was larger and stranger and more full of things worth being astonished by than the convent had suggested. What color? He asked. Red, she said. But not just red. Like red that had been somewhere very old, and brought something back with it. That is, Rias said from her position at the training ground's edge, in a voice that was very careful, consistent with what I would expect from a partial expression of the sealed energy at this stage of dissolution. A pause. They will come back. Probably more fully each time, as the seal continues. How will I know when they are fully expressed? Issei asked. When you can choose them, she said. Rather than having them choose the moment. He nodded. He looked at his left hand, at the boosted gear that was quiet now after the interval, and thought about choosing. Asia came to stand beside him, which she did sometimes, with the quiet companionship of someone who did not need speech to be present. Issei, she said. Yes. When you had wings. Even for 4 seconds. Did it feel like something you recognized? He thought about it honestly. Yes, he said. Like a word in the original language. She nodded slowly. I thought it might. You did not look surprised. You looked like someone who had remembered something they did not know they had forgotten. You notice a great deal, he said. I pay attention, she said simply. It is the thing I was always best at, even when I was not allowed to do much with what I noticed. You are allowed now, he said. She looked at him with those clear green eyes. I know, she said. I am learning what to do with that. Take your time, he said. There is no test. She smiled. The small real one, the one that had been getting less tentative as the weeks passed. Thank you, she said. For that specifically. Chapter 31, The Old Name. The 5th seal break came at the beginning of April, which was also the beginning of the new school year, which felt like the universe having an opinion about timing. He was in the club room alone. It was early, before anyone else had arrived, and the spring morning was coming through the old windows with the warmth of something that had been building toward this temperature for several weeks and had finally arrived. The fifth break was not a quality. It was not a memory. It was something different from both, something that he did not have adequate words for in any human language and had to describe afterward in the language of comparison. It was like hearing his own name spoken in the original language for the first time. Not Issei. Not the Lucifer that the current Satan Surzex carried as a title. The name that had been before either of those things. He could not say it aloud. Not in this form, not yet. The human vocal apparatus was not constructed for what the name actually was. But he knew it. He knew it the way he knew his own heartbeat, not as information but as presence. He sat very still with it for a long time. Drake was awake, very quietly, in the warmth of his left hand. Yes, Drake said, when the stillness had gone on long enough. That is it. Yes, Issei said. How does it feel? He thought about the question with genuine care. Like coming home, he said. But not the home you left. The home you were always moving toward. That is accurate, Drake said. They sat together in the spring morning, the dragon and the person who was becoming, increment by increment, the thing he had always been underneath the ordinary beginning, and the club room was very quiet and the light was very warm. When Rias arrived at 7:42, she found him sitting in his habitual chair by the window with his eyes open and an expression on his face that she had not seen before. Not in any of the seal breaks, not in any of the faction meetings, not in any of the evenings in this room. She stopped in the doorway. The fifth one, she said? Yes. She came in and sat across from him and looked at him with the fullness of her attention. Tell me, she said. I know my name, he said. Not this name. The first one. She was very still. The name beneath all the others, he said. The one that was there before the title, before the war, before everything. I cannot say it yet. But I know it. How does it feel? She asked. The same question Drake had asked. The right question. Like something I did not know was missing, he said, has been returned. And it was not a wound while it was missing. It was more like a room I had not gone into yet. And now the door is open. She held his gaze. Are you all right? She asked. Yes, he said. And then, with the honesty they had built between them, I am more than all right. I am beginning to understand what I came here to become. She was quiet for a moment. Then she reached across the desk and covered his hand with hers, which was a small gesture and also an enormous one, because Rias Gremory was precise about the things she chose and what she chose communicated exactly what she meant by it. Then I am very glad, she said, that I was here for it. So am I, he said. Outside, the spring morning continued. The crow, which had been absent through the winter, had returned to its habitual railing. It looked through the window at the two of them with what Issei had come to consider an entirely appropriate level of satisfied approval, and then it turned to face the morning and was quiet. Chapter 32, Promotion. The rating game system recognized promotion not through ceremony but through genuine demonstration of growth, which meant that no one could schedule it or plan for it. It simply happened when the conditions were met. The conditions were met on an April afternoon during a routine training exercise. Issei was working on directional control, the specific skill of sending boosted energy in a precise direction rather than radiating it in all directions, which was the more efficient application but required considerably more focus. He raised his hand. He called the fourth interval, and the boosted gear did something it had not done before. It rang. Not loudly. Not dramatically. The way a bell rang when it was the right size for the space. A note that was exactly what the moment needed. The crimson energy shifted. The wings came back, fully this time, the complete expression that had been hinted at in the 4-second appearance in March. Crimson primary feathers, and at the edges that third thing that was not light and not darkness, that color with no human name. And at the base of the wings, where they attached, a secondary pair. Smaller, but present. The pawn had promoted. Rias was standing at the edge of the clearing with her hand pressed flat against her sternum, which was the gesture she made when something was large enough to require the physical grounding of contact. Kaneko was very still. Akino had a hand over her mouth, which was the gesture she made when something was more than she had prepared for emotionally. Asia's eyes were very bright. Ireina said, clearly and with full conviction, I knew it. Issei stood in the clearing with the wings fully expressed and felt, for the first time, what the original self had felt at the beginning. Not the exhaustion of the war's end. Not the weight of the misunderstanding. The beginning feeling, the one that had existed before any of the complications. The feeling of something that believed the world was worth everything it was going to cost. The feeling of hope. Partner, Drake said, and his voice had something in it that Issei had not heard before, something that was the draconic version of the thing Aquino had in hers and Asia had in her eyes and Rias had in the hand pressed flat against her chest. I know, Issei said. Good, Drake said. Then let us see what we do with it. He folded the wings. They stayed. He extended them again. They responded. He was choosing them now. He looked at Rias across the clearing. She had moved her hand away from her chest and was watching him with that open, complete expression that she had stopped trying to manage. He walked across the clearing to her. Well? He said. Aye, she said, and stopped, and tried again. I have been preparing for this moment for a very long time, and I find that the preparation did not fully account for the reality of it. Is that good or bad? It is, she said, with the precision she always brought to true things, the best possible version of being unprepared. The kind that only happens when something exceeds even your most optimistic model. He looked at her. The spring afternoon was warm on the clearing and the wings were folded quiet at his shoulders. Thank you, he said. For the 6 years. For the rooftop. For all of it. You do not need to thank me for that, she said. I know, he said. I want to. She looked at him for a moment. Then she nodded once, accepting it. Behind them, Ireina was explaining to Asia in a rapid, enthusiastic undertone exactly what a pawn promotion meant in rating game terms and what the strategic implications were, and Asia was listening with the focused attention of someone cataloging new information, and Kaneko was standing with her arms folded looking at the sky with an expression that was the Kaneko version of deeply moved. And Aquino was watching everything with the warm, knowing attention she used when she was very happy and wanted to remember the details precisely. Chapter 33, The Question, Asked Again. Surzex came to Ko in the second week of April, not for a meeting and not for strategy, which was how Issei knew it was personal. He came alone. He came in the late afternoon when the old school block was empty and the spring light was coming through the clubroom windows at the particular angle it had in April, warmer than March and softer than May. He sat across from Issei and said, I want to ask you something that I have been debating asking for several months. Ask, Issei said. The title, Surzex said. Lucifer. I carry it. I carry it because the position required a name, and the name carried weight, and the weight was useful for organizing what needed to be organized after the war. But the name belongs, a pause, to you. In a way it does not belong to me. And I have been wondering what the correct thing to do with that is. Issei was quiet for a moment. You carry it well, he said. That is not an answer to my question. No, Issei agreed. It is not. He thought carefully. The title was always a description, not a possession. It described something about a role, about a function. What you do with it, how you govern, how you hold the weight of it, that is what makes a name real. Not inheritance. But nothing, Issei said. I am not here to reclaim a title. I am here because I chose to come back and learn wisdom from the ground up, and that purpose is not served by arriving and claiming governance. He met Surzex's eyes. What I can offer is not a title. It is what the title was supposed to mean. The question. The belief that free will and wisdom belong together. That is what I carry. You can call it whatever you like. Surzex was very still for a moment. Then he said quietly, My sister made an extraordinarily good choice. In what? In the rooftop. In the decision to find you. He looked at Issei with the expression he had when something confirmed something important. She spent 6 years watching a light in a dark room. I never told her whether it was the right decision because I did not know. I know now. It was the right decision, Issei said. It was the best decision anyone in my family has made in several generations, Surzex said, with the warm certainty of a brother who meant it. Issei thought about Rias at 12 years old with her instruments, and her patience. Yes, he said. I agree. They talked for 2 hours, which was the longest Surzex had stayed in Ko without an official reason, and the conversation moved through things that were not strategic, the nature of governance, and what made a leader worth following, the difference between power that commanded and power that served, what it felt like to carry a responsibility that preceded your own existence. Issei talked about the ordinary life, about what it had taught, about what the ordinary love of his parents had given him that no amount of supernatural power could have produced. Serzex listened the way he had when he first heard the qualities described, with the attention of someone who was learning something they had not known they needed. If I may, Serzex said, near the end of the afternoon, ask one more thing. Yes. The original question. The one the war was about. If you asked it again now, after everything, how would you ask it differently? Issei thought about this for a long time. I would not make it a question to argue with, he said finally. I would make it an invitation. I would say, I believe in you. I believe in this creation. I believe in it enough to want it to be free, to be able to choose, to be able to make mistakes and grow from them. I believe in it so much that I want to give it everything it needs to become what it is capable of becoming. A pause. And I would make sure the love in it was audible. Not just the logic. Serzex looked at him for a long moment. If it had been said that way the first time, he said slowly, there would not have been a war. No, Issei agreed. There would not. Is it too late to say it that way now? It is never too late, Issei said, to say a true thing clearly. Serzex was quiet. Then he stood, and he looked at the club room around him, at the space that had become the center of something he had not anticipated, and was more grateful for than he knew how to express in the formal language of supernatural governance. Then, he said, I think that is the speech for the formal acknowledgement ceremony. The one Seraphal has been planning. If you are willing. Yes, Issei said. I am willing. Chapter 34. The Ceremony of Three. The formal acknowledgement was not large. This was by design. Seraphal had proposed something understated, which surprised everyone who knew her, and which she explained, with characteristic directness, as follows. The point of the ceremony is not the ceremony. The point is the thing being acknowledged. A large ceremony would make the ceremony the point. That would be missing it. It was held in the neutral conference space in Ko, which had become familiar to those who needed to be there. Representatives of the three factions. Azazel with Kokabil beside him, which was itself a statement. Michael through the communication sphere. Serzex and Seraphal representing the devil faction. And Issei, with Rias's peerage behind him. All of them. Aquino and Kaneko and Asia and Ireina, standing in a line, the people who had chosen to be here with him before anyone else had confirmed whether it was worth choosing. He was not nervous. He had thought he might be. He had prepared, over the weeks since Serzex's visit, for the possibility of nervousness, the way you prepared for weather. But standing in the conference space with the spring light coming through the windows and the people he trusted arranged around him and drank warm and certain in his left hand, what he felt was not nervousness. He felt ready. Not ready in the sense of having finished preparing. Ready in the sense of being the right person in the right place at the right time, which was a different kind of readiness and considerably rarer. Serzex spoke first, as the highest-ranking devil present, and he said the things that needed to be said about the historical context, and the formal recognition, and the meaning of the acknowledgement for the three-faction arrangement. Then Azazel spoke, and he said what he had said in the February meeting but in the formal register, and Kokabil stood at his shoulder, and said nothing but the quality of his presence was different from the January courtyard, settled rather than pressured, the quality of something that had found the answer to the question it had been holding. Then Michael's presence said what heaven had decided, in the careful, precise language of someone who had been choosing words with weight for 2 millennia. And then it was Issei's turn. He had not written anything down. He had thought about it, the way he thought about things that mattered, honestly and without performance. He said what he had told Serzex he would say. He said it in his own voice, which was the voice of a second-year high school student who had spent 6 months discovering that he was also the continuation of something much older, and who had decided that neither of those things was more important than the other. He said, I believe in this creation. I believe in every part of it. I believe in it enough to want it to be free, to choose, to grow, to be wrong and become better. I believe in the angels who kept order because order matters. I believe in the devils who govern because someone must. I believe in the fallen who asked hard questions because questions matter more than the discomfort of asking them. And I believe in the humans who built their ordinary lives without knowing any of this was above them, because the ordinary life is the point of all of it. The whole purpose. The thing all the power and the order and the questioning is supposed to serve. He paused. Then he said, the question the first Lucifer asked was about love. It was always about love. I am sorry it was not heard that way. I am sorry the love in it was not audible. I am here now, in this form, because I wanted to understand from the inside what that love was for. And I do. I understand it completely. He looked at the room. At Azazel, who was very still. At Kokabil, who had his eyes closed and his wings very slightly open. At Michael's presence in the sphere, which was warm with something that was the archangel's version of moved. At Serzex, who was looking at him with the expression of a person who has spent a long time holding something and has just been told they can set it down. At his own peerage behind him. At Rias, who was not managing her expression and whose eyes were the color of autumn water in the spring light, open and certain and completely present. Thank you, he said. For being here. For hearing it this time. The room was quiet. Then Azazel said in a voice that was not the formal register but the genuine one, we hear it. And that was enough. It was exactly enough. Chapter 35, Spring, and what comes after. April gave way to May the way good things gave way to better things, gradually and with increasing warmth, and the old school block lost its winter weight and became something lighter. The crow returned to its railing permanently, which Issei had decided was a statement of intent rather than coincidence. Hamasaki's ramen stall extended its hours, which was a development of genuine significance. Matsuda and Motohama noticed that Issei was different in a way they could not precisely articulate, and they responded to this the way they responded to most things that exceeded their categorization, which was by continuing to be exactly who they were in his vicinity and trusting that the friendship would hold. It did. His parents noticed too. His mother, who had been watching him with the particular attention of someone who knew her child well enough to know something had changed significantly without knowing what, asked him one evening whether he was happy. He thought about the word. Yes, he said. Not because everything is easy. Because I know what I am doing here. She considered this. That is, she said, the best kind of happy. He agreed that it was. The peerage settled into the shape it would hold going forward. Aquino had begun to use her power differently, with less containment and more intention, and the lightning that had always felt like something to be managed was becoming something she chose, with the full weight of the choice. She was also, quietly and in her own time, thinking about what she wanted to say to the Grigori. Not about her father. About herself. About what she had become in the space that had been made for her to become it. She had not decided yet, but the fact that she was thinking about it was its own kind of progress. Kaneko had begun teaching. Not formally, not in any announced way, but the younger members of the peerage would find her in the training clearing with observations prepared and she would offer them and then return to her book, and the observations were always exactly right and always delivered with the economy of someone who respected both the truth and the recipient. Asia had started a garden on the small balcony off the room she used at the Gremery townhouse, which was where she and Ireina were both staying. She had no prior gardening experience. She was learning with the methodical patience that she brought to everything, reading books about soil and consulting Kaneko about optimal light angles and producing, by late April, a small collection of things that were growing. Ireina visited 3 times a week, which was edging towards simply living in Ko without anyone formally acknowledging that was what was happening. She had submitted a report to the church's operational branch about the Ko situation and the 3-faction development, and had received, in reply, a communication that she summarized to Issei as officially supportive but personally bewildered, which is fine. Bewilderment often precedes understanding. Rias had done something that she told him about on a Wednesday evening in May with the slightly embarrassed precision of someone who had decided to be honest about a decision that revealed something about them. She had closed the research room, not destroyed it. Archived it. But the instruments were put away and the notes were filed and the space that had been dedicated to watching the light in a dark room had been reorganized. Because the light was in the same building now, and did not require watching from a distance. I wanted to tell you, she said, because you deserve to know it happened. How does it feel? He asked. Like finishing something, she said. And beginning something else. A pause. Better. It feels better. He nodded. They were in the club room, which was where they often were at Wednesday evenings in May, and the windows were open to the spring air and the city sounds, and the crow was on its railing with the patience of something that expected to be there for a long time. What comes next? He asked. Not anxiously. With genuine interest. The seal will keep breaking, she said. The factions will continue to adjust. There will be more meetings and more complications and more things that none of us have planned for. She looked at him steadily. And we will handle them the way we have handled everything else. Together. With honesty and without performing certainty we do not have. That is a good plan, he said. It is the only plan, she said. But I have found it to be reliable. He looked at her in the May evening light, which was warm and golden and entirely honest, and thought about what it meant to have found the right place at the right time in the right form after a very long road. He thought, I came here to learn wisdom. He thought, this is what wisdom looks like. Not grand and certain. Present and honest and held together with people who chose to be here. He thought, I am still learning. He thought, that is exactly right. Rias, he said. Yes. The ramen stall is open late on Fridays now. A pause. Is it? Hamasakison extended the hours. He told me when I went Tuesday. He said spring brings appetite. She looked at him. Then she reached over and closed the book she had been reading and set it aside with the deliberateness of someone making a decision. Then she said we should go. Yes, he said. They left the club room in the May evening with the old school block quiet behind them, and the spring air warm on their faces, and the city lights beginning to come on in the early dusk. Drake was warm in his left hand, patient and present, the way he had been since the beginning. Since before the beginning. The crow watched them go from its railing with the satisfied expression of something that had been right about something for a very long time, and was content to simply have been right, without requiring acknowledgement. They walked toward the ramen stall through the spring evening of Ko, which was an ordinary city in an extraordinary arrangement, and neither of them spoke because the silence was good and the evening was good and there was nowhere else to be and nothing else that needed to be said right now. The seal, deep and patient and dissolving at the rate that was exactly right, turned, and the ember that had chosen to begin again glowed steadily in the spring dark, warm and certain and entirely itself.